Welcome back to day 2. Welcome back to day 2. we're so amazed you're here. So yeah, would everybody agree that was an epic trek yesterday?
It sure was, right?
Yes, it was. And today this morning we're doing Bowen's Brigade Death March. That's Bjorn's name for it. I didn't do that. So I came up with it. So looking for it today. This is going to be Bjorn's 3rd year with us. And I said this to Bjorn yesterday when Mona told me that he was on the free agent market. I signed him. I said, we got him. All you other discussion groups, you can't have him, you cowards. So we got him for us. So, if you've been on a hike with Bjorn before, you know how good he is. It's like Tim yesterday. Everybody saw how good Tim was yesterday. We're in for that again today. Bjorn is a great speaker. He's incredibly knowledgeable, and we're going to have a wonderful day today. Our leg muscles may not think that, but we're going to have a great day. And one thing I came to appreciate about Bjorn the first time I was on a hike with him a while back, it's been a few years, but because I don't walk very fast, as you probably saw yesterday, Bjorn does not walk slow. And I realized pretty early on, I said, you know what? I can hear him way back here. He projects his voice very well. So, and he was doing it for me. I knew he was doing it for me.
Yeah.
So, that was very nice of him. So it is my pleasure for the 3rd year to introduce Mr. Bjorn Skaptason.
Thank you very much, Barry. Thank you very much, and thank you for picking me up off waivers. Yeah, I love getting back with the Shiloh Discussion Group. This is a great group of people that would actually sign up for something called a Death March. And hey, that sounds fun. And so yeah, we're gonna do that today. I want to cover a couple of things that are important to all of us before we jump into the topic. And one of them is I want to ask Mona a question here. Mona, we have a private landowner who's going to host us.
Correct.
This morning, so I want to make sure. I don't know the gentleman's name.
Mr. Tedford Kahn.
Mr. Tedford Kahn. Okay, so I want to send out my thanks and have all of us send our thanks to Mr. Kahn, who's going to invite us onto his property because we couldn't find enough places in the park to fall into holes. So we're going to go over to Mr. Kahn's property, and so I thank him for doing that. And then the second thing I want to have everybody think about while we are on the program today is this. One of our original members and one of our best friends is not with us this year. And Jeannie Cantrell passed away this past year. And Jeannie was here every year with her husband, Steve. And Steve would go on the programs, and Jeannie always had health problems, and she couldn't get out, she couldn't move. But she would drive around and meet us at the stops, and Jeannie would always be there, and
bring us snickerdoodles.
She'd bring us snickerdoodles and so on and so forth, right. And she was a wonderful person, a very sweet person, and she came every year because there was nothing she would have wanted to do more than to join us on the hike. And that's why she was here every year. So Jeannie passed away this year. We miss her. And so let's keep her in our minds while we're hiking. And in our hearts and our minds. And just appreciate the fact that this year Jeannie finally gets to come with us.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
All right. So let's get started with our program. The program this morning is following the operations, the movements of the Confederate Brigade commanded by General John Bowen, General John Stevens Bowen. And one of the reasons I picked it when Perry was asking me what I wanted to do was that I've done a lot of programs, and a lot of them have been about units. And so at this point, after all these programs, I have checked most of my boxes. And so Bowen was getting to be one of the last brigades that I hadn't covered. It was also the last brigade in General Johnston's army, way back there at the very end of the line, up there on the Bark Road, up there on the Corinth Road. And so why not check that box? And it was not a disappointment once I dove in and started learning about these guys, because just like any other Confederate brigade, their experiences here were extraordinary. And there's a lot of great stories in them, and following them around and understanding what their experience was, especially as the last guys in line, the reserve, how we would be able to learn something about the battle that we couldn't learn by looking at any other brigade, by looking at any other unit, because these guys are part of the Confederate Army that has a very specific role, and by following them, the story of the battle is going to be different than it would be for, say, following Claiborne's brigade or Wood's brigade or something like that. So Bowen's brigade was a good choice. Now, one of the first things you've got to do, I've got to do when I check that box and pick the topic, is open up the writings of David W. Reed, the original historian of the Shiloh Park, and look at all of the wonderful, detailed, in-depth, very accurate descriptions of what every brigade did. And so I opened my book right up to Bowen's brigade and found 2 sentences. All right then. We're going to have to, good, we're going to have to find some other book to read. So I don't know what happened between 1895 and 1913 that Reed didn't get much information from Bowen's veterans, but it wasn't, for any lack of them writing stuff down. I just had to go out and find it in other places. So we have an excellent opportunity to meet some interesting people, a couple of great leaders, John Bowen and John Martin. And then another aspect of the program that I think gives us a great opportunity is for a lot of the day, and indeed for the last couple of hours of his life, General Albert Sidney Johnston was with or in the immediate vicinity of Bowen's brigade, of all these guys. So that gives us a chance to look at the last hours of General Johnston from a different perspective. Now, I know Tim has taken you on a Johnston tour, right? And Johnston tour is always going to end with, everybody standing around Johnston down there in the hole. Listen to Governor Harris talk about how he's not even drinking his bourbon anymore, he's dying there. Well, most of the people that fought with Johnston didn't get to stand around quietly and watch him die. In fact, they didn't want to see that. Most of those guys had marched right on up here and were in the middle of the battle. So we're going to do, some parts of our program are going to be that same program, except we're not going to talk about the experiences of General Johnston and Governor Harris and the staff members. We're going to follow the guys. We're going to follow those Confederate soldiers right up the hill, the ones that he led into battle, and then that'll give us a chance to look at the quality of the effectiveness of the leadership that he provided in his last hour, and ask some questions about that and see how the guys being led were able to accomplish or not accomplish their objectives that General Johnston had laid out for him. So that is what we're going to talk about overall today, and then we'll do the second day. So there's going to be plenty on that. Spoiler alert, General Bowen does not make it to the second day. He's going to get wounded, and we'll talk about that when it does. And then on the second day of the battle, The brigade is going to be operating in the same area, but also, very importantly, operating together with the other brigades of General John Breckinridge's reserve division of General Beauregard's army now. And then we're going to visit the areas where they fought on the second day of the battle, which by that time, I hope you will be grateful that they will have moved to a place still near here, but on more open and level ground. In fact, some very nice paved roads. They took advantage of some very nice paved roads to move around, to move us around that day. Anyway, so does that sound good?
Yeah.
Does that sound good? All right. Well, then I think, as we've done before, standing here talking for a long time is just going to get us tired and sore. So, for the first leg of the journey, let's go all the way to the Locust Grove branch and on up the hill. Can we do that? Let's go. In cooperation with David W. Reed, who then created the interpretation that went on top of Thompson's.
Are you familiar with like LIDAR? What LIDAR is? Has there been any LIDAR studies besides what was done in Indian mounds on any part of the field?
Not really. What was done, but the people that brought the LIDAR for the Indian mounds, very generously, for no extra money, did a couple of other spot things for the battlefield. One of the things they found was, they looked at the large burial trench, the biggest one, and saw they're all there. Lots of stuff.
I wonder if now that the technology has gotten a lot cheaper with drones and stuff, I wonder if they've considered doing any kind of expanded that stuff.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome. Yeah, because we can't have people digging around.
Sorry about that.
The whole thing. I've said that so many times. The whole thing is a cemetery. It's not just the National Cemetery. But if we could find out a way to get that information without digging holes in the ground and digging up people's bodies, that would be great.
Tell the Park Service to buy a $30,000 LiDAR drone, and I'll fly it for them and map the whole park.
There you go.
You think
Got a card?
open up right
Get in touch with me. Get in touch with me, and I'll bother them about it. And I'm not with the Park Service. I don't speak for them, and
He has connections, though. He has
You
connections.
think they'll open up right field at any time like this? I mean, that would
be
really
great.
help. Them.
That would be a great project. It would be a big one, though.
Yeah, it'd be huge.
That would be a big one. All right, let's. We're halfway to the first stop, but now we're warm, right? We're out here in the sun. We're a little warmed up, so we've got the introductory material out of the way, and so let's cover a little bit more of our background. And for those of you that came up last, that's fine. That's fine. No one's rushing you.
He's not looking at me
folks
for
in the front, I did set the scene, on Sunday morning when the 55th Illinois is out of their tents and they're finally up here and they're finally starting to get ready for the fight. Stewart's Brigade's getting ready to fight. They would have been right here, and you're looking at the view shed of what they would have seen when they looked up on the other side of that hill, and they'd see their visitors, new Sunday morning visitors coming to call. And that would have been Chalmers Brigade, Jackson's Brigade, and then later in the morning, Bowen and Statham coming up. Where we're standing now, you would have looked up and see Jackson on the hill up there, because and that's because we are invited to one specific area on private ground, and that's what we're going to use to look at that. But first, let's talk about reserves. Let's talk about reserves. You got to have them, right? Got to have reserves. And the purpose of a healthy, powerful reserve for a Civil War era army is that over and over again, you're going to see this especially on the Civil War battlefield, over and over again, both sides, the main forces will fight themselves to exhaustion. They'll fight themselves to exhaustion, and they'll still basically be where they were, where they started. So the the next phases of a battle, if it goes according to plan, they never do, but the next phases of the battle would be to bring in reserves to exploit any kind of opportunity that the main force has opened up in the major part of the battle. And then reserves can blow through and try to create a more decisive victory. And then there's even a third phase, which the early Civil War armies were completely unprepared to use, and that's what we would call the exploitation phase. Certainly in the Napoleonic armies of Europe, they had very large formations of what they called heavy cavalry, which is not something you would even see on a Civil War battlefield in the early part of the war. All of what we call cavalry is what Europeans would call light cavalry. Cavalry you would use for scouting and things like that. But in the Napoleonic Wars and still in the European armies of the 19th century, they had heavy cavalry, and the exploitation phase is, the main infantry force, knocks the enemy, off balance, and then the reserves break through, and finally the heavy cavalry exploits through and chases the enemy down and sabers the tops right off of those Prussian artillerymen while they try to get away. Those kind of things aren't going to happen, especially in the early part of the Civil War, and it's going to result in battles that are not decisive. It's going to result in battles that lead to other battles because the armies do not defeat each other. So the purpose of the infantry reserve, that's what we're going to talk about in this program. And that's that second phase that I was talking about. If the main infantry force can knock the enemy off balance, then you want a reserve to bring forward, and the general wants a reserve to bring forward and smash through. And so the guys we're going to talk about are going to be that force. Now, normally a general would want the reserves to be specially trained for that mission. General Albert Sidney Johnston does not have that luxury. General Johnston's army is assembling from the 4 points of the compass in Corinth, Mississippi, over the course of about 2 to 3 weeks. So the idea of getting, okay, you be the first corps, you be the second corps, you be the third corps, you guys are the reserve. Go out there and practice, fast marching or special formations to go right, go left, and, punch in there and be our... No, he just points. He's just going to have to point at someone and go, Mike, you're the reserve. That'll be your job now. And so we are talking about guys who don't have any special training to be the reserve. There's nothing special about these formations that make them specially qualified to be the reserve. They've just got the job. And that's going to be pretty common in Civil War armies. But it's especially unique here for General Johnston's army, because his army is not out of a training camp where it's working efficiently and everything's going. They've come from Pensacola and Mobile and New Orleans and Kentucky and all that, and they're all coming together. So who are the reserves? So I want to give you a little bit of a picture of who the reserves are for Johnston's army. Now, it is known on the order of battle as the Reserve Corps, and it will be under the direction of General John C. Breckinridge, former Vice President of the United States and now a Confederate general from Kentucky. Breckinridge will be in charge of the Reserve Corps, but this is not necessarily part of the original plan. So let's go back a few months. Let's go back to the summer of 1861, when General Johnston is given the mission of protecting all of the Confederacy from the Cumberland Gap to the Mississippi River. And then presumably beyond that. There's also some, he has authority beyond that too, but he has this huge job to protect the Confederacy, protect the frontiers of the Confederacy from basically across Kentucky. All of what we would consider the Western theater of the Civil War. Generally speaking, the maximum number of guys he had to do that during that time period is about 35,000, which means it's ridiculously understrength. There's no way it can be a line. The only thing he can do is have a post here, and a post there, and a post there, and a post there, and between that, everything's wide open. The Yankees can just waltz right through it when they decide to do it. And so all of the people that are going to be part of this reserve corps, their experience will be in that, in the first year of the war, from that Kentucky perspective. They're part of that undermanned line that is defending the northern frontier of the Confederacy. Now, major parts of General Johnston's army here, as I said before, will have been drawn from protecting Mobile and New Orleans and serving around Pensacola and stuff like that, and then brought up here for the battles. But the people we're going to talk about had been with Johnston throughout that first summer and the fall and the winter. There are four major posts that are being protected. On the west, it is Columbus in Columbus, Kentucky, under General Polk. And then east of there is protecting the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers. And so that's going to be Fort Henry and Fort Donelson. Then Johnston himself has a headquarters and a post at Bowling Green, further east. And then farthest east in Kentucky is under General Felix Zollicoffer, a small army that protects around Cumberland Gap and the hill areas north and west of there. Let's start with that. General Zollicoffer had this small army of Mississippians and Kentuckians in 1861, the fall of 1861, and his job was to operate in eastern Kentucky. Now, the Yankees also came down to eastern Kentucky, and as 1861 turned to 1862, that became the first seat of war, the first seat of combat for the fighting along this line. And at the Battle of Mill Springs, General George Thomas's Federal Army defeated Zollicoffer's Confederates. And Zollicoffer's Confederates, General Zollicoffer was killed. The Zollicoffer's army retreated back across the Cumberland River and then endured a long, torturous winter march across the Cumberland Plateau and down the Cumberland River to join General Johnston at Nashville. And there, Zollicoffer's army would join General Johnston's army, and by the time that happened, by the time they came together, what had been General Zollicoffer's army, now under General George Crittenden, had been reduced to a single brigade. And then they were reorganized into a brigade to operate together, and they will, when they arrive here on this battlefield, they will be a brigade of Tennessee and Mississippi troops commanded by Colonel Winfield Statham. So when we talk about Statham's brigade during the course of this program, they're going to be on the left of Bowen as Bowen moves around, but with them in the reserve corps, so they're going to be an important part of this story. Statham's brigade, think that is Zollicoffer's army. That is Zollicoffer's whole army from the Battle of Mill Springs, and the survivors of that are now just a single brigade. But for all of that misery, that's also a lot of experience. That's also a lot of experience, and also these are some very tough guys, because these are the guys that survived all of that. So Statham's brigade is going to be one of the really good brigades. The second one, which will not play a part in our talk today, but I'm going to introduce them to you anyway. Zollicoffer was in East Kentucky at Bowling Green with General Johnston. That is where, especially under General Breckinridge and General Simon B. Buckner, that is where the Confederacy attempted to create a Confederate Kentucky army. a Confederate Kentucky army that would join the Confederates and liberate Kentucky for the Confederacy. And most of the stories having to do with these Kentucky guys are really interesting, but we're not going to walk with them today, so I'm not going to tell many of them. But it does involve them like sneaking out of Kentucky and getting down to Nashville in order to form up their Confederate regiments there, and then those regiments come back into Kentucky. And that is what's later going to be known as the Orphan Brigade, the Kentucky Brigade, under the command of Colonel Robert Trabue here at Shiloh. I'm going to mention them once or twice more, but they mostly fight on the eastern part of the battlefield on the first day of the battle, and then they join up with the others from the Reserve Corps on the second day of the battle. But they're not part of the reserve that we are going to be following today. The reserve we follow today will be Colonel Statham's brigade and the brigade, if you didn't already know, of General John Stevens Bowen. And those are the guys we're going to talk about right now. And they would be associated initially with the farthest western part of this line, Columbus, Kentucky, under General Leonidas Polk. And that is where Bowen and his guys would serve for most of the fall of 1861 and the winter of 1862. They would have the benefit of a great deal of time because there was not any combat going on there. They would have the benefit of a great deal of time to train, to get out on drill fields and march around and train. So they're not going to be green when they get into battle. Now, one thing that does happen for them, they get transferred. They get transferred over to Johnston's force at Bowling Green. So they're both in Columbus and Bowling Green. So those are the three brigades that make up Johnston's reserve. And I want you to think of them as being from all the way from the east of Kentucky to Bowling Green to all the Mississippi River. And three different brigades that came from three different places. So when I tell you they didn't train together, that's what I'm talking about. They were hundreds of miles from each other before they came together to be the reserve. Now, just a little bit of the rest of the campaign that gets us here. Fort Henry and Fort Donelson fall, right? January and February 1862. When Johnston's line is broken, that means Johnston's army has to fall all the way back. They give up Nashville, they march all the way back into North Alabama, and these three brigades come with them. The two, Bowen and Trabue, come down with Hardee, and then they meet Statham as he comes in out of the Cumberlands and marches with them down into Alabama. They transfer to the west by railroad, and as General Johnston's army is coming together in Corinth, these happen to be the three brigades that are bringing up the rear. And as Johnston's army is generally camped out around Corinth, and Johnston both needs outposts and he needs to spread out his camps so that everybody's not living on top of each other, these three brigades stop in the village of Burnsville, Mississippi. And modern day Burnsville, it's the same place, but it's about halfway between Iuka and Corinth. And if they had to march, if Johnston had to march north and east to reach Shiloh and Pittsburgh Landing and attack Grant here, the guys from Burnsville marched due north. So that would be like straight down there. Due south from here is Burnsville. So these guys are in Burnsville. Johnston needs a reserve. He wants a reserve corps for his army when it finally comes together. And he declares that these guys are going to be the reserve and General Crittenden will command them. General Crittenden is drunk. So General Johnston fired him. And therefore, but this happens, late, right, the clock's ticking down. It's a bad time for George Crittenden to be drunk. He had a terrible problem with alcohol. We can assume without being able to diagnose him that he suffered from alcoholism. And so he never shows up in the war again after Johnston fires him. And then Johnston replaces General George Crittenden with former Vice President John C. Breckinridge, the guy that is had been in charge of the Kentucky. And so now Johnston has what he considers his reserve corps. and it is General Breckinridge commanding Statham's Brigade from Zollicoffer's army, the Kentuckians, the orphans, from under Colonel Trabue, and General John Bowen's brigade from the west. John Smith Bowen, an interesting guy. We'll probably talk more about him today, but let's just get the basic biographies down right now. Born in 1830, a Georgian. John, did I say John Smith Bowen? John Stevens Bowen. John Stevens Bowen. Born in 1830, a Georgian. He went to University of Georgia. He didn't finish. He transferred over to West Point. And he graduated from West Point in 1853, class of 1853. It's interesting in my mind to think of the graduates from West Point in relationship to the U.S.-Mexico War of 1846 through 1848. The guys who graduated earlier in the 1840s, first of all, they'll be older and more senior when the Civil War comes. But second, they've had the opportunity to fight in the U.S.-Mexico War. And there'll be a coterie of the guys who've been in Mexico. And you're going to see those in the Union Army and the Confederate Army. You're going to see those guys commanding armies and commanding corps. And they're going to be names like Grant and Beauregard and guys like that. I was going to say Sherman, but Sherman was in California for the Mexico War. But Lee, of course. Yeah, but I was just thinking that when the war started, California was Mexico. So the war had something to do with that. Okay, Sherman, we give Sherman credit for being in the U.S.-Mexico War. But those guys are in a position to become the higher ranking guys. Guys who graduate West Point, and they're part of the West Point coterie, after the U.S.-Mexico War, you're going to see a lot more of those. You're going to see a few of them get it into senior positions. I think John Schofield is among those. And there's a few others, Confederates too. But you're going to see these guys commanding a lot of divisions. Class of 53, class of 54. You're going to see these guys commanding divisions. And I'm not going to make a whole list of them right now, but a good example is John Bowen, who graduates in 1853. He did put in 2 years. There's no obligation for a West Point graduate to go into the service during this time. But Bowen served for 2 years. He did serve for a time in St. Louis, Missouri, which led him at the time of his resignation from the Army. He initially went back to Georgia for a little while and then decided, I am going to relocate, I'm going to settle. 1857, John Bowen moved to St. Louis. Moved to St. Louis, Missouri, because that was a place he loved. He'd been there, he'd served there, and he wanted to set up his life there. And he went into business as an architect in St. Louis. He did very well, lived on the southern part of the city. Had a nice house, built a nice house, and became a well-established guy in St. Louis. St. Louis was a very strange kind of place coming up to the Civil War, in that there's sort of an existing southern population that founded the city and built it. Now, when I say they're Southerners, I'm talking about people that moved from Georgia and Alabama and Tennessee to Missouri to bring their lives from those places and resettle it in the new frontier of Missouri. And St. Louis is the gateway to that, so a lot of people settled in St. Louis, and St. Louis was well established as a southern-leaning city. Obviously, Missouri was a slave state, so the institution is well represented around St. Louis, even though across the state of Missouri, largely there wasn't much slavery, but along the Missouri River and around St. Louis, someone could bring enslaved people into Missouri, set up a plantation, and reproduce Georgia or Virginia or Alabama in Missouri. And that is the population that John Bowen fell in love with, and that's why he wanted to settle in Missouri. Now, as most of you probably know, even today, St. Louis is a good place to get a beer. which has a historical attachment, as I know you know. So by the 1850s, we are starting to see, even though there's been a huge Irish immigration and a lot of Irish people have moved to St. Louis, we're moving past, culturally, we're moving past the U.S. is moving past the Irish immigration, and we are in the middle of the German immigration, the German wave of immigration. And from the Germanic states, waves and waves of immigrants come across, they settle in St. Louis, and St. Louis becomes more quickly than the original inhabitants would wish, an immigrant city. And as an immigrant city, lots and lots of Germans. And the Germans bring their ideas, their own ideas. They want to transplant their world from Europe to St. Louis. That creates a lot of conflict in the city. And so by the time the conflict starts to lead to war, St. Louis is very much a divided city. Now, for all of this time, John Bowen is having a good business. He's got, like I said, he's got his architecture business. He runs he designs houses. He has a nice house that he's built for himself in the southern part of the city. He's got a laborer that brings him chopped wood that he becomes acquainted with. It's a fella that's trying to run a farm out south of St. Louis called Hardscrabble. And so this old guy will bring wood by, and Bowen will buy it. If they ever chatted together, they were certainly acquainted. Then they go, "Hey, you were in the Army too?" Yeah. My name is John Bowen. Well, my name is U.S. Grant, and they got to know each other, at least an acquaintance of each other. And Bowen, again, Bowen being a prominent guy, might well have met the university president William Sherman when he briefly moved to St. Louis before the war started. The war started, and Bowen was highly placed as a graduate of West Point and a veteran of the Army in the organization of the Missouri Volunteer Militia. And the governor, Claiborne Jackson, sends him out to the western part of Missouri to train the militia. And then he comes back. And in May of 1861, Claiborne Jackson, April 1861, the war starts, Fort Sumter. In May of 1861, Claiborne Jackson calls together the Missouri militia at Camp Jackson in St. Louis. And John Bowen is there along with other high-ranking Missouri militia people when Captain Nathaniel Lyon, leading Unionist paramilitaries, mostly made up of German immigrants, marches on Camp Jackson and captures it. They surround them and they capture everybody, and everybody in the camp, about 600 guys, including Bowen and all the rest, are captured and marched away into St. Louis. Of course, that also leads to the St. Louis riots and some shootings. That's another story. But all these guys from Camp Jackson get captured and held and then paroled and dispersed, and they're not supposed to do anything against the U.S. government. That includes Bowen. And during the same time, Governor Gamble and Sterling Price get together the Missouri State Guard, and they have all these fights at Wilson's Creek and Lexington and all the rest. The Camp Jackson guys are not part of that. They've already been captured and given paroles. But they are also some of the first, most enthusiastic Confederates in the state of Missouri. And they're really mad. And so they start moving south. They just start getting out of town. Never mind that parole. I'm getting out of town. I'm getting on a steamboat. I'm going south as fast as I can go, as far as I can go. Maybe not all the way to Confederacy, but certainly to Cape Girardeau, southeastern Missouri. John Bowen goes all the way around to Memphis, gets a commission in the Confederate Army, and the guys from Camp Jackson start meeting John Bowen in St. Louis. Not in St. Louis, in Memphis. They came from St. Louis. They start meeting in Memphis, and they start organizing a new regiment. And like I said, they had gone, in order to get there, they had gone through southeast Missouri, so they've already been through Cape Girardeau and the bayou area and all the rest. And those guys were also very pro-Southern, pro-Confederate. And so they picked up several hundred new recruits there. And so in the city of St. Louis, in the city of Memphis, the St. Louis officer, John Bowen, starts to put together the first Missouri Confederate regiment. The first Missouri Confederate regiment. And it's unique amongst Missouri Confederates in that it was not part of Sterling Price's army. It did not come from all of those battles that Price fought in Missouri, such as Wilson's Creek and Lexington and Pea Ridge. These were the guys from Camp Jackson that went straight to Memphis and organized the first Missouri regiment there with Colonel Bowen as the commander. So that takes care of one of the regiments we're going to meet today. The first Missouri will be part of Bowen's brigade, and we're going to follow them. Also at Memphis, they're going to start getting together more troops for the brigade, and eventually these guys will be put together under Bowen's command. The most important faction of that would be 2 regiments of Arkansas troops. 2 regiments of Arkansas troops, the 9th and 10th Arkansas regiments. They were organized from Arkansas broadly, but generally I would say from the southern part of Arkansas and from the Mississippi River counties. Not many of the hill people or the northwestern Arkansas people in these regiments. They tend to come, and they're early enlistees, so they tend to come from the communities along the Mississippi River or across the southern tier of Arkansas. They meet at places like Pine Bluff, and the companies come together. The companies come from everywhere. There's a company from Helena, there's a company from Camden, but they're all over. They come together at Pine Bluff, and these 2 regiments, the 9th and 10th, come together, and they are sent across the river. Now, they come together with a certain character to them. Arkansans have a certain character, a certain self-identification, you know. And so long before they even sign up for the Army, you know, they're walking around with Arkansas toothpicks hanging off of their belts, those Bowie knives. And they do a lot of hunting, and they're still very much frontier people. And they're very proud of that, and they lean into that. So by the time John Bowen gets charge of the 9th and 10th Arkansas, he's got some pretty enthusiastic guys on his team, but also guys who are very much independent, you know, very independent, very frontier type of guys. So it's going to take some work to get these guys to be soldiers the way Bowen would like them to be. His final regiment, so we've got 1st Missouri, 9th and 10th Arkansas. And his final regiment is composed mostly of people from Mississippi, but this regiment under Colonel John Martin was not able to get enough Mississippians together, the whole 1,000, so they also recruited from Tennessee, and they had at least 1 company come across the river from Arkansas. So it was a regiment that had Mississippi and Tennessee and Arkansas all in it, so it was designated the 2nd Confederate Regiment. 2nd Confederate Regiment. So if you know a little bit about the organization of the Union armies, don't think of something called the Confederate Regiment as being a regular army formation. It's what the Confederacy it's a designation the Confederacy would give to a regiment that was made up of men from multiple states. This regiment's going to have a pretty short career, but we'll talk about that later. So these are the regiments that come together under Bowen. Eventually they get together in Kentucky around Columbus. In March of 1862, John Bowen gets his commission as Brigadier General in the Confederate Army, and then through the winter and spring of 1862, these 4 regiments, the 1st Missouri, the 9th and 10th Arkansas, and the 3rd Confederate, live together, train together, fight together. They don't fight, but they get to Bowling Green. They train at Bowling Green with General Johnston right there with them. So this is a well-trained, well-organized, and well-led brigade when they begin the retreat from Bowling Green. Think we understand them? We met our guys? Oh, we can learn more about them as we go. Let's get up. Let's get up and finish this first leg of the walk.
Not still burns, though.
Oh, well, it might rival them.
Pretty rough down through there.
That'll be a good YouTube clip.
You were waiting to catch
Yeah.
the ball.
Oh.
Be nice to each other, help each other up.
I'm following you. I'm going to grab your belt. Or else if I start slipping back.
Go down together.
How else can you climb that with a holding the camera?
Yeah.
In order to do that, they had to detach the pieces. Is that your red truck by,
Go back the same way.
No, that's the good news. I've read all these reports. I've read all these reports many, many times. And none of the commanders said, they say we advanced from here to there. None of them said, boy, we went down into a really deep ravine and it was really tired and it was really tough. Nope, they just said we crossed it.
And those idiots 163 years from now are really going to enjoy it.
Pretending to do what we did in 10 minutes that morning.
Possible they actually didn't come here. That they had a much
less arduous route. You're just doing this for fun.
No, it's straight ahead. Straight ahead. That's what we're doing. Hey, let's find the tablet.
Take your word.
Yeah, no, there's a tablet up there where there's a battery. This is one of the two that's posted out front.
Hey, Paul. Watch the hole.
How you doing?
You think that's more in line? Good one? Yeah. Good.
Further down further up the river, there was more fog and a little bit more color. That color's maybe about 15, 20 seconds. Cool. For a couple of flags over there. I look forward to seeing it. And I drove around and there's some cooperatives here.
Yeah.
And actually got a couple in front of the monument. Got one standing in front of one of the camp cabins.
Yeah. Cool. Was he reading it? Was he reading the tablet?
You're going to come in, you're going to be walking for a couple seconds, and they're just going to be judges sitting there.
Straight north.
That way, there's like 3 different judges.
Yeah.
Could be out of it
I mean, once we get to Larkin Bell,
Yeah.
it's mowed. And then the fences seem to be.
In Clawson, in some places.
We have made it to the position where the Reserve Brigade came, but now we need to get the Reserve Brigade here. Last time we left them, we learned who everybody was. We met Breckenridge, we met Statham, we met John Bowen, we met Robert Trabue, the Kentuckians, the Arkansans, and all of Statham's guys, Mississippi guys. They were at Burnsville. And so when the order came for Johnston's army to march out, the Reserve Corps needed to march from a different place than the rest of the army. They were marching northeast from Corinth, and the Reserve Corps was going to march due north from Burnsville. They also wanted the Reserve Corps to come in behind the rest of the army because they're going to be the reserves. They're going to be used later in the battle. So Breckenridge takes off, marching due north with his 3 brigades. I'm guessing, I didn't write it down, I'm guessing 6,000 to 8,000 guys, 6,000 to 8,000 guys, a little smaller than the other 3 corps in the army. By the time they catch up with the army has totally fallen into a terrible disorganization because of the terrible situation with the roads, the mud in the roads, the poor logistical organization of the army, which is, as I said before, an ad hoc force coming here. An ad hoc force with an ad hoc reserve. But Breckenridge got up behind the army, and he took his position as the last of the people in the trail of Johnston's army that's going to make the attack. These guys, the Reserve Brigade, would have been in the vicinity of General Johnston's last bivouac. Who's been out to the Johnston bivouac site before? Right. So if you get that far down that plateau to where it actually starts to go down into Lick Creek ravine, and that is where Johnston and Beauregard had that big meeting. And Johnston said, "I will fight them if they're a million. We'll attack in the morning." The men standing around watching that and listening to it, the infantry, would have been the Reserve Corps, and the last brigade in the Reserve Corps was Bowen's brigade. On the morning of the attack, the Reserve Corps, Breckinridge's Corps, lurches forward slowly. I mean, we've talked about this on a lot of different programs. The Confederates did not come screaming into the Union camps, going root hog or die, and bayoneting Yankees in their tents and stuff like that. That stuff didn't happen. That did not happen at Shiloh. Those first lines of battle went grinding across the landscape like steamrollers. And then when they encountered Federals, the Federals fought them and they pushed them back. And so that means the guys at the end of the line are taking 10 steps and stopping, 10 steps and stopping, waiting to be called forward, waiting for the time, as Johnston expects, that the main battle line will crack the Union resistance, and that he will send his reserves in to finish off Grant's army. Also, let us say again what we've said many times on these programs. General Johnston's plan of battle, which had been promulgated all the way down, was to turn the left flank of the enemy, drive him away from Pittsburgh Landing and into the swamps, where he shall be destroyed. We'll get them all. We're going to get every Yankee in this camp. In order to do that, need to crack him hard with the main part of the army, send in the reserves, and the reserves, he expects, are going to come around the Confederate right, the Union left, and bash through and put the coup de grace to Grant's army. So as the rest of the Confederate army gets involved, as they began attacking into Sherman's camp, as they began attacking into Prentice's camp, the Reserve Brigade is just shuffling along. Hurry up and waiting for that order to come. And then finally, around the middle of the morning, they get the order to come forward from General Beauregard, who is commanding from the rear of the Confederate army, while General Johnston leads from the front of the Confederate army. We may talk about that a little bit later, but General Beauregard sends out his message to General Breckinridge: bring your guys forward, I got a job for you. Sherman's division was putting up a very, very stiff resistance at Shiloh Church, and it was not entirely clear yet to the Confederates that they were fighting the right flank of the Yankees, not the center or the left flank. And so Breckinridge came forward and was asked to send a brigade to the left to help the Confederate left, to help General Hardee on the Confederate left. And at that point, he detached Colonel Robert Traboux's Orphan Brigade. They weren't called the Orphan Brigade, the Kentucky Brigade. After Stone's River, they started calling those guys the Orphan Brigade. But they detached the Kentuckians, and the Kentuckians went to fight on the west side of the battlefield. And that, for April 6th, is the end of the 3-brigade reserve. The reserve is now 2 brigades, and the Kentuckians are gone. So, after making that slight detour, Breckinridge returned to the road, came all the way back around, and arrived at Prentice's camp just as Prentice's division was being overrun. Jones-Withers brigades, Chalmers and Jackson, had rushed up there and totally overrun the 18th Wisconsin and 15th Michigan and other regiments like that. And Prentice's division was beaten. This part of the battle is over. And they've arrived just in time to see that the battle was over. It was at this time that Captain Samuel Lockett, an engineer on Johnston's staff, came around to General Johnston in the midst of the victory and said, no, this was not the Yankee left. This was not the left flank of the Yankees. I've just been over here a couple of miles to this area where Lockett was, and I looked across the hills, because you could see across, and there's a whole other Yankee division over there. Lockett was wrong. It was a single brigade. It was Stewart's brigade over here in their camp. He said, no, there's another Yankee division over there. You got to go. We have to keep going further and further to the east if we're going to turn the left flank of the enemy. And so Johnston made the decision, yes, we're going to do that. He sent Chalmers and Jackson. He pulled them out of the line and sent them around. And then, after thinking about it for a little while longer, he turned to General Breckinridge and he said, okay, take the reserve, follow Chalmers and Jackson, and as they come into line to attack the Yankees, I want you to connect. I want you to be on their left, on my right. I want you to make a connection with the rest of the army so that we have a full line of battle. This is the commitment of Johnston's reserves. He is expecting that when they go in, that will be the exploitation phase of the fight. That they will defeat Grant's army, and the reserve and everybody else that's with them will sweep right on into the swamps and destroy Grant's army. When Johnston reaches this plateau, and he did reach this plateau, and lined up behind, and sat his horse with his staff behind the lines of battle, we are now in the position occupied by General Jackson's brigade. And facing over there, we can see Stuart over here. We can see Chalmers lining up to attack him. And Bowen is coming online to our left, and Statham is behind him. And Johnston can look back over the ridges and see that. You can see his reserve starting to come up. And at that time he talks, I believe, to Governor Harris, his volunteer staff officer. He's now gotten everybody in line. He's got a good look at Stuart. He knows what he's up against. He knows what he's going to do to turn the left flank of the enemy. And he gave the order for the infantry to step off. And Chalmers stepped off into the ravine over there. Jackson headed into the ravine down here. Skirmishers well to the front. And as this, I'm paraphrasing here because I didn't bring exact quotes. As Jackson's guys started to descend over that hill and down into the ravine, and as they disappeared, Johnston turned to Governor Harris and said, aha, that checkmates them. That checkmates them. And Harris responded, well, I know you're better at chess than I am, so you'll forgive me for not understanding whether, and Harris was trying to say, I don't see it. I don't see it happening. He's trying to be polite about it. And Johnston chuckled and said, yes, no, Governor, this checkmates them. This mates them. Johnston is launching the attack right now from here that he intends to finish the battle. They're going to win the battle from here. Spoiler alert. We'll leave it at that.
He didn't water his horses in the Tennessee.
He did not water the horses in the Tennessee. And by no means were they in a position to crack the whole Union Army and begin the exploitation phase with the reserves. Nevertheless, these are the reserves. They're the last reserves. There's nobody else. So if there's ever a need for reserves from Johnston, he's going to have to find them somewhere than his front line of battle. Or he's going to have to find them in his front line of battle, because as of this moment, every Confederate is in the front line of battle. Now, for our own orientation, like I said, Jackson, this is Jackson's position, and we came here because I wanted to visit Girardi's tablet. It's part of the Jackson's brigade. And also it gives us a timeline, which is accurate. It's about 10:30 in the morning now. Sherman's division is finally withdrawing from Shiloh Church. After all of this time, Sherman is finally withdrawing from Shiloh Church. Prentiss has been overcome. We've spent the 45 minutes to an hour that the Confederates over there in Prentiss fell out and sacked the camps. You remember that story, and in that camp, Johnston gets himself a tin cup, remember, and he carries that around with him for the rest of the day. He also leaves his doctor, Dr. Yandell, behind to care for the Yankee wounded, because now we're all, they're not soldiers anymore, they're wounded, we need to help them. Leaves his personal doctor behind, and then he himself comes here, and he is riding behind the soldiers, and the soldiers see him personally. And about the time he orders these guys to take off, Bowen is ready, and if you would look over here, if we were to spend more time on this ridge, we'd go down into that ravine and up onto the next ridge. That would be Bowen's position. Also, he'd have a battery of artillery under Captain Alfred Hudson with him. And then about 800 yards to the rear, and still coming up at this moment, was Statham's brigade. Statham's brigade, next one over. Chalmers, Jackson, Bowen, Statham. Johnston has his infantry in line of battle, supported by artillery, and they're ready to go.
Where's Bragg at? It says it's part of Bragg's Corps. So
It's
where's
part of Bragg's Corps, yeah.
So where's he at? Where's
Earlier about this time of day, the Confederate attack had fallen into such disarray that none of the Corps commanders commanded their own guys anymore. And there was a decision made amongst the Corps commanders, Beauregard involved in that, that they would give up their organizations and each Corps commander would take charge of a section of the battlefield, a geographic section. So at about this time, General Bragg gave up command of Bragg's Corps and became the commander of the center zone of the battlefield. General Johnston himself came over here, and present was high command. Present was General Johnston himself, General John Breckinridge, commander of the Reserve Corps, and General Jones Withers, a division commander from Bragg's Corps, who is now detached from Bragg's Corps and taking commands directly from General Johnston. So, yeah, that's the answer to why this says Bragg's Corps.
I was confused. I didn't know where.
Bragg is somewhere else, but Bragg's Corps, a lot of them are here.
Isn't Johnson? That's where he's starting to lose control of the battlefild, right?
It seems to me that Johnson's starting to lose control of the battlefield, and like I'm saying here, I think he thinks he's winning, and I think Governor Harris is trying to politely tell him, I don't think we're winning. I don't think we're winning yet, General. I think we need to do some more. But Johnson said, no, that checkmates him. We're going to go around the end, and we're going to finish this job.
Bjorn, a lot of this ground and stuff was kind of foreign to them too, right? They didn't have good maps or anything.
They didn't have good maps, and they'd never been here. That's why Captain Lockett rode over here, and only after the battle over there was done, they thought the whole battle was done. Captain Lockett came back and said, no, there's more Yankees. We gotta go further east if we're going to get around them. Yeah.
So you said Chalmers and
Jackson
were in the Prentice camps.
Yes,
They
they
were
were.
part of that assault. So what was the route?
Chalmers was. Jackson never got into that.
Okay. All right, but then together or separately, they made their way here. What was the route each took?
They went to the Bark Road. Good question.
To Bark.
Good question. The question was, how did they get here? Did they march straight across? They did not. After Prentice's camp fell, Chalmers and Jackson, under command of their division commander, Jones Withers, were withdrawn and ordered to come over here. They did so by marching a quarter-mile back to the Bark Road, getting on the road, marching across, turning off the road, and advancing
You want to show this map?
to this position. No, we'll be good with that. Thank you, though. And then Breckinridge followed by the same route. Breckinridge followed back to the Bark Road, came around, found the left flank of Jackson, and then moved up on his left.
So Bowen more or less got here the same way.
He took the same route to get here. Yes.
Bark Road.
Yep.
So the question I beg, and I've asked Ed fires this more than once.
Mhm.
Why didn't they just keep going on the Bark Road to the Hamburg-Savannah Road and up the Hamburg-Savannah?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, he didn't either.
I don't know the answer to that. I'll give you a guess. And I'm not any smarter than Ed Barth was. You know that.
Well, you know I'm in third place.
But I would guess that there's a compelling reason in every Civil War general's brain to keep his line of battle connected. Yeah. So sending an entire detachment around and losing contact with the army when you don't know where you are, I could see General Johnston saying, I don't want to do that. I want to send him around, and I just want to bring him up and connect them with the existing army.
Were they talking to locals?
This is a guess.
No.
No,
Those
guys are gone. Those guys are
They
gone.
weren't talking to any local people about
No, we're out in the middle of nowhere. We're out
they
in the
were
middle of
farms.
nowhere.
I mean,
Mark.
these fields had occupants, the fields. I mean, they were.
And they've been gone. Because the Yankees been camping over here for 6 weeks.
So it was pretty much
No, we need to,
depopulated.
we need to, in my opinion, we need to arrive at a decisive notion that the Confederates do not have good reconnaissance. They do not know where they are. They do not know the land. They do not have good maps. And no, they don't have a Confederate-leaning farmer to walk them around and show them.
I would have thought their intelligence would have been wanting to contact local people and say, give us some intelligence.
That would have been something we would have thought. I will remind you that this is an ad hoc army. It did not exist at all. So imagining that Johnston had an intelligence section would not be overestimating Johnston. He would have loved to have something like that. He has trains arriving from Mobile. He has guys getting off the trains and marching to.
Both armies are in similar situations.
Right. It's a bit of an over. I'm exaggerating for effect. All of Johnson's guys at least got to spend a day or two in camp before they moved. But that's the point I'm trying to make. This is an ad hoc army, and as soon as he gets them together, he says, "Follow me," and they go.
Basically, when he sent, I'm sorry, Mona. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Mona.
All of the local boys here that joined the Confederate Army were all east. No, there was none. No local.
Oh,
They
there
went
was
east.
no one in
They
the
all
ranks
sent-
who could help either.
No, they all got sent east, and all the locals that lived here, which this was a hard scrabble. There wasn't a whole lot of.
Yeah.
They had all skedaddled because the Yankees had come and took over their homes, so they all left.
As you've seen. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's
Bjorn,
Like Widow Bell's farm, she was gone.
Gone.
they're all
Okay.
gone.
Bjorn was talking about Jeannie this morning, Jeannie Cantrell. Her husband Steve had relatives on the battlefield, Cantrell Field, was named for their family.
Oh, wow.
And Steve said that his family, when the Union Army moved in, they all hightailed it to Texas and never came back.
There wasn't much here in the first place.
Right. Yes, a very, very remote place. Even like I've told before, even for this neighborhood, let's continue to remember that the towns are Hamburg and Savannah. Pittsburgh Landing is nowhere in between, but it's a place where you can land a riverboat when the Tennessee River's at flood, which is how the Army got there. But no, we're in the backcountry.
Boondocks, as we call it around here.
Yeah.
Question.
Yes.
Your placard says the battery was engaged. Counter battery fire?
Yes. Yeah. For Girardi's battery, they would have deployed here, like this says, about 10:30, straight across. If we go straight across the ravine, which we will, then we will get to the Larkenbell Field, and in the Larkenbell Field, or just near it, is a battery of Union artillery called Mann's, Missouri Battery, and they are pointed toward this tablet, and this tablet is pointing toward them. And so, yeah, during all of this, we have a while these guys are deploying, we have an artillery duel going on across the Locust Grove Ravine.
And they hauled the artillery from the Bark Road
Up to here,
up to here.
and then they will haul it down into the ravine.
And where's the next position it talks about here? Where's Stewart's headquarters?
Stewart's headquarters are this direction. Right, so if we were, well, when we get to Larkenbell Field, there will be a Confederate battery tablet with cannons. And that is Girardi.
That's true.
Yeah.
Up by the,
Unless I'm mistaken, I'm pretty sure I'm not.
on the Hamburg.
No, right on the Hamburg and Purdy Road. So yeah, if we were to walk from this to that, our route's going to take us a different way. If we're going to walk from this to that, we would be following in the footsteps of Girardi's battery.
Why not take them on the Bark Road and around?
Well, that's what I asked. Oh, you mean the cannon?
Yeah, I'm talking about the battery.
Oh, boy, that was some hard work.
They had maps, but they didn't have.
You know what? I love why didn't they do something? Questions, but I got to confess to you, the only thing I know, and it's taken me a long time, is a best guess on why they did do something.
I have a lot of things.
Okay.
And I've been thinking about this the whole week. Why didn't they start one day, or like, what if they would have started one day earlier and Buell not had gotten a chance to, rip?
Good question.
I wonder what would have happened.
Yes. Well, they intended to, and they didn't.
And the road slowed them down.
And the road slowed them down.
Well, that goes back.
2 days.
Yeah, they wouldn't have wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, that was
All right,
before.
shall we?
Before
First, let me consult with
Hey,
Mona.
it's too late. We're not.
Mona, do you think we have a clear enough trail once we get through the Vale and down into the?
It's the best way.
Okay.
We don't need a trail.
0 degrees.
What's the trail?
Due north.
Oh my God. Me too.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we can look at that.
I didn't run out until we were headed to the car last night.
I think you got an accident after you're done.
There's just a few places up to
Yeah, you're welcome. Another fun. Yeah. Dry and
Took a picture going up, I want to take a picture going down. The day's not over. Just sit right up over here, and Chalmers infantry comes up, and the Chalmers soldiers later wrote, we didn't attack them because we didn't know what to do. We thought it was some kind of Yankee trick. and finally, Colonel Stewart, the brigade commander, comes over and,
no, Melbourne, what the hell are you doing? Get your guys in line of battle. And so this was just, yeah, this is like a circus playing out in front of the Confederates just for their entertainment. And then the 55th Illinois finally gets in the line of battle, and you know, Chalmers is like, are you ready? Okay, now let's fight.
The thing to consider, this is probably really full of water in here.
Oh,
the
this
rain.
would have been, like I'm saying, oh, don't go over there, it's over shoe top mud. Every step of everything on the day would have been over shoe
They's
top
already
mud.
muddy before they even got here.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, we're all over. Now we managed to get Jackson to the bottom of the hill. Bowen is to our left, doing the same thing, but the most convenient route for us, across ground that we're welcome to to be on, is here. So we're going to continue straight up the hill until we get to the park boundary. We're going to figure out a way to get over that fence, and then we'll be back in the park and we can go anywhere we want. You ready? Let's go.
I'm gonna wait for the parents. Nine. Got it. I have those 5 swimmers. I got this. I got extra clothes.
In infantry tactics, and so he could spend a couple days with the sergeants, getting them in line, and then get the sergeants to get the guys in line, and very quickly they would, as the 1st Missouri Confederate Regiment that crossed right over here, was as close to an elite formation as you could be without having been in battle, without having gotten that experience of being in battle. And it was because, you know, they had Bowen commanding, was a West Point grad, and Lucius Rich, the second in command, who, because Bowen was now in charge of the brigade, was directly in command of the 1st Missouri. And again, that meant the West Point kids, the West Point graduates, did have a master class in tactics. And then they would be considered engineering majors. But strategy, you know, the operational art, they didn't use that term back then. Strategy or operational art, war college stuff. Remember, the war college was created in what, 1910, something like that. Americans didn't study that. They didn't have to. All we were ever going to do was go out into the woods and chase the Indians away. That was our military preparedness for the Civil War. And so putting together formations of 44,500 guys was difficult, but those West Pointers could do that. But the doctrine for doing a Napoleonic battle was simply absent from American military thinking.
Which was one reason in Sherman's School of Instruction in 1881 is now the Command and General Staff College at Leavenworth. That's one of the reasons it came into being, because these guys, you know, they got the engineering background. They weren't ever taught to command.
Right.
Nothing like this. So, yeah.
And nobody hit the
Right.
Stop it. 10,000 in Mexico?
Interpretation of the Shiloh battlefield. I heard this story from a unimpeachable source over Uzo in the Athenian after a Civil War roundtable. There was this old fellow who'd been a grad student at Indiana University, also a disabled Marine, decided to take a road trip, take a weekend off from his studies at IU and take a road trip. Crawled in his car with his one good arm, his right arm, drove down to see Fort Donaldson, drove down to see Shiloh, and he met Major Likes, Ranger Likes, Ira Likes, and they start talking and start walking around, and Ira Likes says to the kid with the disabled arm, a Marine can spot another Marine anytime. He said, you know, hey brother, when did you serve? As, you know, Guadalcanal, New Britain. And so he shows the kid around, and about halfway through the tour, young Edwin Cole Barse turns to Ira Likes and said, "Do they pay you to do this?" And Major Likes goes, "It's a job, kid. Yeah, you can do it. You can wear the flat hat and get a gray and green uniform, just like me. And if you're a Marine on disability, you're also in a pretty good, position to get a government job. And I'll write you a recommendation." And Ed Barth never worked at Shiloh, but getting a tour from Ira Likes in about 1952 is when
set the hook.
Yes, when the grad student from IU turned to the dark side.
I've never heard of that story.
Neither had I before Ed Barth got a couple of Uzos into it after a Civil War Roundtable meeting.
I've heard that story.
All right, let's keep going. Thank you to
Mona.
Mona and our host,
Tedford Con.
Tedford Con. And thank you to Jackson's Brigade for getting us this far across the ravine. So we're now going to take a 90-degree turn, and we are going to pick up Bowen's Brigade. And from here on out, we will be moving in the footsteps of the people that we're following. Okay? So follow me.
We get another ravine, I hope.
This is it. There's a lot of good stuff, If you want concise and yeah.
Faster that way than he would have had he walked.
You get that?
No, thank you.
We're not laughing at him. We're laughing at him. Okay, we're laughing at him.
It's a teaching moment. It's what the soldiers would have went through.
Don't come if you can't. Get up from the front.
And then the next time I came on, they had that beautiful museum. Right.
I was trying to keep my boot dry and I just slipped on the face. Also want to keep my sock dry.
Can you take a picture of your car? Oh, there it is.
The Journal of the Illinois State Historical Society in 1963 gives an Illinois commemoration of the Civil War. Ned Bowers wrote an article for it. Yeah. In 2013, I was the guest editor starting the
Somebody has brought out a colorful Dixie cup, still stained with moist chocolate cake. So I don't know who the litter bug was, but I'm going to go ahead and carry it in.
Does it say Bowen's Brigade?
It says to me, Bowen's Brigade. Welcome to the Axis of Advance of Bowen's Brigade. Fortunately, somebody left that there yesterday so that I could find it again today. So at this point, Bowen is advancing. He has come across the ravine. Jackson is on his right. Chalmers is on the right of that. Chalmers is fully engaged in a deadly infantry fight. We can hear it from here. We can look, there isn't this many trees. We can look over there and see the smoke coming up. Jackson and Bowen, according to doctrine, have their skirmishers well forward. And so they would have stopped somewhere like this with the main line of battle to keep their heads below the rise of ground. And then send skirmishers over into the ground that we're about to cover now. And there they would encounter skirmishers from Stephen Hurlbut's division, who's later going to be the peach orchard defenders when we get to that part of the battle. And this area we will cover will be a battlefield. It's part of the battlefield that don't get markers. They don't get monuments. It's where skirmishers go out between the lines. It's people come here all the time and say, well, Bjorn, why do they march elbow to elbow all the time and they didn't run around in the trees and hide? They did run around in the trees and hide. That's called skirmishing. And under the right circumstances, you send your skirmishers forward to fight, to find the enemy so that your line of battle doesn't march right into a trap. And then the enemy on the other side of the hill doesn't want you to find their trap that they've set for you, so they send out a cloud of skirmishers, and between the lines, this kind of battle that people imagine doesn't happen in the Civil War happens. It does all the time, and that's skirmishers, 6 or 8 feet between each one. A company deployed from the regiment steps forward, skirmishers to the front, a platoon of reserves for the skirmishers, following the skirmishers, and then the line of battle behind that. 3 lines to find the enemy so that you do not walk right up on an ambush. And then at the same time, the enemy sending skirmishers out to stop your skirmishers from revealing their position. So that's what's happening constantly in the battle. Let's not let our minds tell us that there's any sort of calm, that there's any sort of part of the period of the battle where we're just standing around doing nothing, and then we march up to the other team and we start shooting. The battle is consistent, the battle is constant, and both sides are looking for the opportunity for the right time and the right place to throw the line of battle in and blast your way through. And so what's going to happen for the next portion of our walk is we are going to advance as though it was the line of battle. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you stand in line. But we're going to be as though we're the line of battle, and while you're doing it, imagine your comrades are out ahead of you fighting this low intensity combat right in front of you, and then advancing, and you're watching them fight and you're watching them fall, and you're watching their comrades bring them back wounded, and they pass through the line to the rear, and then you continue to push forward. That's the kind of thing that's happening during this next part of the walk. You're not going to see a marker, and you're not going to see a monument, because they don't have markers and monuments for skirmishers. They have them for generals. Skirmishers are privates. So when they fall out there, they fall. All right, let's get a, let me go ahead and take a reading here before we do questions. And
the skirmishers from
oh gosh, Rob, you're a
couple hundred yards.
Couple hundred yards.
And the skirmishers work in a team of 2.
Okay.
So what you fire, I'm loaded. So when you're ready, you tell me I shoot, and then I advance.
Right.
And you're covering me.
And so we're doing the thing where we cover each other and scoot forward, and then we have this reserve behind us.
Right.
And if you and I find, aha, here's a bunch of the enemy, the sergeant can bring up the reserve, and we can.
And if you're getting pushed too heavily, you'll rally on that reserve.
Right. And so you hopefully you still defeat the enemy skirmishers without the enemy without your main line of battle ever having to fire a volley. These armies later in the war are going to become very good at that kind of fighting. Yep. It's not at Shiloh. Shiloh, there's a lot of face-to-face massacre at close range. But in the later part of the war, the tactics for sending out clouds of skirmishers are going to be resolving major conflicts without the main lines of battle ever coming together. It's a different story for a different campaign. We'll call it Atlanta. All right, shall we go? All right, let's do it. Follow me. Right now, all through the 100-some years that the park has existed, it's been a process of acquiring and preserving land, and even, you know, having people continuing to live and operate their farms on government land. And so, gosh, if there anybody here that had been visiting Shiloh in the 50s or 60s, if there's any of us that are that far enough along, they'll remember driving along the tour route and stopping to get a tank of gas at the gas station and get a sandwich at the diner, and then there's the traffic is stopped because the kids are out of the high school and they're all driving their cars around, especially before that bypass was built in 1966. All the tour roads were regular community roads. Right. So don't pull over and stop at Tagaka monuments because the kids are going to come, wow! How are things going?
We're here.
All right. All right. Okay. Our line of battle, Bowen's line of battle, and let us say that we are in the area of operation of the Confederate regiment under Colonel John Martin. The Missourians are to our right, the Arkansans are to our left, the 10th and then the 9th all the way over. The skirmishers are in front, and our line of battle has come up to a camp. We have skirmished our way all the way across Locust Grove Ravine, and we have come up to a camp. And from that camp, we are continuing to get very heavy skirmish resistance. And it's time for us to move forward into that camp. And as the skirmishers disappear over that road, which is the Hamburg-Purdy Road, then we will follow it up to the tents of that camp. Okay? Follow me.
No, the house is not
Create a forward line of battle. There's going to be a secondary line of resistance, and then they will send outposts out, which will be individual skirmishers out in the trees, or they'll dig a foxhole. Thinking World War II at this time. Yeah. And so, once the attack happens, your challenge is you're the commander on the hill. You stop the attack with the skirmishers if you can. You have to figure out whether the enemy is serious. If the enemy is serious and they push in the skirmishers, then you fight like hell for the secondary line of battle and try to drive them back from there. If they're really driven in, then you know you're in trouble. Then you make your last stand on the main line of battle. So the plan is always to drive the enemy back as soon as you can, and not to lure him into a big bloody fight here. And then all I can say is flip the coin for an attack. And it's basically Okay, we've reached the camp of the 71st Ohio Regiment. Has anybody ever been here before? Really? No one was here yesterday?
Yeah. Actually, I missed it, so I'm glad we're
Yesterday, Tim Smith led us around on a tour of all the camps in the Union Army, and most of you brave souls that followed him all day long got to see every camp marker almost every camp marker.
We were getting pretty weary by here, Bjorn.
Every infantry camp marker. Is that what he said? Yeah. Well, this is the 71st Ohio Infantry, and they're part of Stewart's Brigade. And and their line of camps, this is the westernmost end of the line of camps. It continues that way with the 55th Illinois and the 54th Ohio from the Union point of view. So at this point, Bowen, again, is moving up, and he's continuing to be cognizant of what is going on to his right. Chalmers is still fighting Stuart, because Stuart and those two regiments, those 800 guys, just won't die. And Chalmers just keeps having to attack and attack and attack, and those guys just won't die. They keep fighting. And so Jackson comes up. Jackson encounters the 71st Ohio Regiment over here. I think this even probably says their first line of battle was in that direction. Yeah, if you look at the tablet. And then the 71st was driven back by Jackson, but Jackson didn't chase him because Chalmers is still stuck fighting over there. And then Bowen advances to this point with Johnston present, and sends skirmishers forward. So the battle is on in the peach orchard area as a skirmish action. And then some of those guns come up. It took a while. You're going to have to stand here and wait for the guns to come up. But Girardi and Gage and Hudson, who's Captain Alfred Hudson's Mississippi Battery, is the one that's traveling with Bowen. Hudson worked his way across the way we came. And he's going to come up here and he's going to set his guns up so that he can shoot over the top of the hill. We're going to go there in a minute and engage Union batteries. So now we have stopped at the camp. There are Yankee tents in front of us between the enemy and us. We are taking small arms fire through the tents. We're also taking artillery fire that's coming over us and exploding or bounding down across the way. We're taking casualties from this. And again, having covered all this ground, we have to get reorganized and get everybody in line. And the Missourians are here. The Martin and his Confederate Brigade are here. Confederate Regiment are here. And the Arkansans, 10th and 9th, are over in that direction. And then once we start to see more success over here, Johnston is losing his patience. We have to push forward, and so this line of battle is going to have to push forward, still with Chalmers fighting and Jackson over here. And by now, getting toward noon, we have we don't know it, but we have a very strong line of battle, Hurlbut's division, waiting for us in the peach orchard. Between the peach orchard and us, they have skirmishers and reserves. In between their skirmishers and reserves and us, we have skirmishers and reserves. We also have the artillery going at it by now. So this battle is fully underway. We are at the right of the Confederate attack. We are attempting to turn the enemy's left and drive him into the river. And the commanding general of the army is sitting on his horse Fire Eater right behind us, making his decision. Okay? Let's move forward to the road. Move through the camp. We've gotten to the point in our program where there's a lot less walking and a lot more fighting. So we're going to be covering covering less ground and having more fighting to talk about. And here we finally found a Bowen tablet. There are 3 Bowen tablets on the battlefield, 2 for the first day's fighting and 1 for the second day fighting. but basically they're summarizing everything that happened that we've already done right here. I think that also goes to what I said at the very beginning of our program when I looked for it through Major Reed's book to find the story of Bowen's Brigade. Found like 2 sentences. But they knew where they were, and they knew when they were there, but they didn't have a lot of detailed stuff when they put up the tablets. But here we see, and there, Bowen has reached here at 12:30. They left Girardi's battery, or basically the area where we left from, at about 10:30. So we've gobbled up about 2 days, 2 hours of General Johnston's daylight, just with the skirmish fight coming through Locust Grove Ravine, skirmish and artillery fight. But now at about 12:30, we are reaching a crisis point. General Johnston has committed his reserves to the front line. There are no more reserves, and there are still very strong enemy positions to the front. And they are going to have to be overcome. By the time Bowen got here, Statham was still following at about 800 yards in echelon to what is your left. But at this point, they catch up. When they arrive here, they catch up. So now Statham will be in line, ready to attack here. Bowen will be in line, ready to attack here. Captain Hudson's guns are here, firing in support of the line of battle. Jackson is up and ready to attack through there. Girardi's battery, thank you, Rob. He's brought his battery through the ravine, and they're in position, and the battle is well underway. And this is and we are now in the position. Well, actually, what we're going to do, go forward a few feet. But now is the time that we are the enlisted men standing around where a lot of these very large life and death, history-making decisions and scenes are played out. And we're going to talk about a few of them, but I don't want to talk about them here on the road. I want to go forward into the ravine that is known as the Mule Lot. Okay? So we're going to advance into the Mule Lot.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. That's where the mules are kept. Yeah. Okay.
And the mules, or just the commoner?
When their 40-20 was down, they got
very far, but we've been under fire. We're now at the bottom of a ravine in an area called the Mule Lot, and that's what it was. Sarah Bell had a cabin up over here. This was her farm. She had cotton over here, maybe cotton up there, and then a peach orchard up by where your cars are. And here, Johnston's army, his reserve, Jackson Chalmers over there, Bowen and Statham here, have advanced right up to the lip of this ravine. Beyond that ravine, Yankee. So if you've been hoping to see a Yankee for the last year, you're about to get a peek. The skirmishers are brought in at this point. The skirmishers come back in and they join the line of battle. Chalmers is still fighting against Stewart, who will not die down there. Jackson is moving into these ravines, and now we see Jackson is starting to fight against Federals in those deep ravines southeast, of the Hamburg-Savannah Road. General Johnston is in this area. An Arkansas soldier sees him sitting behind the line of battle, probably just sitting right here. He'll find a place where Fire Eater can stand, where he can peek up over the ravine without getting his head too exposed. He has us down here to keep us from getting killed, and one of the Arkansas troops from down here, 9th Arkansas, sees him and he says that Johnston was behind our line and he could see from all the way from the right all the way to the left, and I could see him looking to the right and looking to the left and talking to his staff officers and waiting. Now what is happening back there that they can't hear is that Johnston is waiting impatiently for this line to go forward. He is with Governor Harris and he's with General Breckinridge, the immediate commander, the reserve commander, and he ordered an attack somewhere about 1:30 in the afternoon now. And like I said, our tablet said 12:30. So I said we're exchanging long distance of walking with short distance and a lot of fighting and time going by as we go through the next part of the program. And Johnston is getting more and more impatient that he cannot get this line going. General Breckinridge comes over to him and he says, General Johnston, I have a Tennessee regiment that won't fight. He says this in the presence of Governor Harris of Tennessee. Governor Harris turns to Breckinridge and he says, General, show me that regiment. And then Breckinridge and Harris, peel off and they go over. There's a regiment called the 47th Tennessee. They're going to do just fine. But for now, they're in their first battle and they are very skittish. And the line is skittish. And I'm not going to say that Bowen and Statham are standing here calmly ready to go into battle. The commanders are, but the privates know this is about to be it. You might be in your last 10 minutes. And for a lot of us, it will be. And so they are nervous. And this is where Johnston notices that. And Johnston starts to bring Fire Eater up here to the line. And now the privates in the line of battle are interacting with their army commander. Johnston goes down here toward the Arkansans, towards the 9th Arkansas, and there he has one of his famous stops. He stops and he stands up in his stirrups so that everybody can see him, and he tells the men of Arkansas, you are famous. Well, I'm paraphrasing, by the way. I would have brought Preston Johnson's book, but he said, men of Arkansas, you are famous for your skills with the Bowie knife. But today you wield a nobler weapon, the bayonet. And so he's telling him, okay, this is not going to be a knife fight in the woods. You need your soldiers now, and you need to use that bayonet. We're going to attack. Bayonets forward. 5,000 bayonets coming right at the Yankees. They're going to be shooting at your face, but if you get those bayonets under their chins, they will turn around and run. He's trying to tell those Arkansans, that's his way of saying, stay together, close your ranks. You are wielding a nobler weapon, the bayonet. And then he comes down, and he's talking to some other guys, and Harris and Breckinridge get the Tennesseans ready to go, and the whole line is starting to get more focused and more ready. And Johnston comes out in front of the line of battle. I don't know the regiment, but he would have been here. And he moves along the line of battle and he pulls out that tin cup, the tin cup that he captured from Prentice's division earlier this morning. And he rides along the line of battle saying nothing. And he takes that cup and he taps each bayonet as he goes along. And then he will stop and he will say, the enemy is stubborn, boys. We're going to have to give him the bayonet. And he rides along the line, the army commander getting the men ready. Now we have a quote from one of the men saying at this point, when Johnston did that, the entire line of battle was fairly trembling with ardor. They've gone in a few minutes from being, oh my God, I don't want to do this, to let us at them. Let us at them. And at that point, Johnston has got them lined up. He's got them in front. And he says to them, I will lead you. And he turns Fire Eater around and he begins walking up to the lip of the ravine. This is one of those times we hear that good old rebel yell, right? We're going to get a rebel yell on this battlefield, probably one you're never going to hear quite like it again. And those guys start marching behind the Army commander to the top of the ravine. Follow me. Again, I'm going to set the woulda, shoulda, coulda aside. What we know, the guys went because he
Personal connection.
personal connection. Right. Yep.
Army commander, governor, and former VP.
And former VP.
How can you not be?
Yeah. How can you not? Yeah, yeah. Let me see if I can remember what you just said, Mike. You got the Army commander, you got the governor of the state, you got the former vice president of the United States leading a rebel army up against the Yankees in this peach orchard. How can you not be excited for that? We're at the point now, again, seconds are going by. We're at the point now where General Johnston turned Fire Eater to the side and he went back through the line to follow it. He did not take the attack in. He did not do that. But he led them to this point, and they're now under small arms fire. This is where the line of battle, without anybody in between, comes under small arms fire. Johnson goes around, and again, General Bowen is right up front for Bowen's brigade right now. Jackson's to the right, fighting the Illinois soldiers back over here in this ravine. Statham is to the left, and this is the big attack. Probably this whole thing started at about 1:40, and just a few minutes have passed by now, and we're coming up on 2 o'clock. As soon as they, I'm glad that General Bowen wrote this down. As soon as they emerged from the ravine, they took a volley of small arms fire, and I think General Bowen said it knocked down about 24 of our guys at the first fire. And at that point, he let them go, and the entire Confederate line advances, firing upon these Illinois regiments. The 41st Illinois Regiment right here, under Lieutenant Colonel Ansel Tupper, and the 28th Illinois Regiment right there, supported by those guns. Those guns are there at the time. Those Chicago light artillery guns over there, you can't see them right now, but they're there at the time, and they are belching canister. They're firing like small arms at the front of an infantry fight. And the Confederates are coming right up, advancing, bayonets forward, stopping to fire, reload, continuing, and that's the battle that's going to happen for the next couple hundred yards. So we're going to advance again upon the peach orchard. Follow me.
Question on tactics.
Question over here.
Company commander forward.
Company commander on the right of the company, keeping it in line. Yeah, yeah. And then lieutenants and sergeants are file closers behind.
Battalion commander mounted.
Battalion commander mounted at the rear of the center of the battalion. Mm-hmm. Yep. And a Civil War regiment, if they have all their field officers, they don't always have them. 2 battalions, right and left. A major and a lieutenant colonel at the behind those battalions, and the colonel commanding the regiment behind the colors to the rear of the lieutenant colonel and the major.
Do you recall your skirmishers with bugle call?
If they can do it. I don't think we have an army that can do that right now. This army will be able to do that. In fact, this brigade will be the best brigade in the Confederate Army within a year. But probably you're going to recall them with voice commands. in this circumstance. Yeah. But in this case, he recalled them before they moved. So it's just the line of battle because we know at this point. Yeah, but they probably would have used voice command.
I was thinking about back in the woods. Okay.
Yeah, they probably would have used voice command. All right, continue.
Okay, where did Johnson get hit at?
And after this, shortly thereafter, at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock.
Last year we did a.
He was in the saddle for quite a while before he.
Now, right now, let's just say we're in the middle of the cauldron. We are if it's a little after 2 o'clock on April 6, 1862, we are in the middle of the cauldron. General Johnston's attack, Statham, Bowen, Jackson, Chalmers, is pushing forward. Chalmers is finally turning that lever on Stuart. Although Stuart will report that he still had people defending his first position at 3 in the afternoon. Seems a little late to me. General agreement is that they were done by noon, but still hanging out, still fighting for about an hour after. But at this point, we're in the middle of the cauldron. The 9th Illinois is defending a ravine down here. They're fighting against Jackson's brigade. That regiment, that Union regiment, will be driven out of that ravine. Jackson's troops will flank them from the lower part of the ravine. And so those Illinoisans, the 9th Illinois, will get stuck, trapped in the ravine, and there they will be massacred. They will just be shot to pieces, and even as they try to scramble out of the ravine, they will be shot as they try to get away. They are absolutely mowed down. The dry brush in the ravine catches fire, and the dead men and many of the wounded are burned to death in this area over here. This part of the field catches fire. Now it is, yes, I know it's been wet, so it's a smoldering kind of fire. It's not a wildfire, but it burns over. This Confederate that fought here called it the Burnt District. He said, I passed through the Burnt District. These Illinois gunners hitch up their cannons and they slowly retire in the direction of the Bloody Pond. Our brigade, the Missourians coming right up here, Martin here, the Arkansans over in the field, are pressing hardly on these Illinoisans, and Colonel Tupper, commanding the Lieutenant Colonel Tupper, commanding the 41st Illinois, goes down. He's killed with a shot through the temple. And at that point, the 41st Illinois begins to fall back, grudgingly, fighting as they go. The 28th over there begins to fall back before Statham. General Hurlbut has taken the regiment from the right, the 32nd Illinois, and moved them to the left. And as we start to enjoy some success driving the 41st Illinois back, we encounter 32nd Illinois right back here at the other side of this small little field, ready to make another stand and fight again. So the Union Army is starting to fall back, but they're still fighting. They're not running. We are not pursuing. We are not going to run the Yankees down and capture them. They are fighting for every inch of ground, and we are having to drive them from every inch of ground. But we push forward, and as we push forward, the commanding general is on this little hill back over here. We don't know it, but he sends one last command over to General Statham's brigade. What happens after that, we don't know. And they're not going to tell us, okay? So, we continue to attack while whatever happens to Johnson happens over there. We're fighting. Full disclosure. Full disclosure to anybody who's watching or who might watch. I don't understand what this tablet says. Now, I know you brought me down here to talk about it, but I don't understand. I don't understand this tablet. I do have an enormous respect for David W. Reed, and I have an enormous respect for the development of this park and the interpretation of this park and all these tablets. What I'm saying is that I don't understand what this tablet means. This tablet says this brigade was engaged here about 4 p.m. and fell back for more ammunition. By reading the writings of General Bowen, by reading the writings of Colonel Martin, who was later to take over him, by reading the writings of other Confederates in the brigade, the Arkansans, all of them would have told us we're right now where we're standing, we're in the middle of it. We're not getting to the point where we turned around and went back. It's just getting started. And now the timeline seems about right. Again, I said we were no longer walking across large amounts of territory. We are now short amounts of territory with large amounts of time. And from the time we crested the ravine back there, a little before 2 p.m., until probably around 4, when they get to this point, constant, close quarters, intense combat. Face to face with the Confederates of Jackson, Bowen, Statham. Now, Tennesseans under Colonel Manny, see on there. General Chalmers has paused after defeating General Stuart to rest. And so now he's still out on the left, but he's still out on the right, the Confederate right. But the Confederate right wing that is engaged in combat in the turning movement is Jackson's brigade right down here. And Jackson is going to continue fighting. And I would add one more disagreement with this tablet. In about a quarter of a mile, we are going to get to the Missouri State Monument for the Battle of Shiloh, which was clearly put down with the approval of the Park Service, marking the spot where the 1st Missouri was fighting. So all I'm saying is that I don't understand this tablet. But as I understand it, we're still fighting. The Yankees are falling back fighting. The Confederates, Bowen is probably starting to use up the last of their refills. If they have any secondary, second or third units of fire for all of these guys, they're digging into that, but they're continuing to attack. I don't understand. I don't think they retreated from here. I think They continued fighting. And I think the evidence supports that. So we're going to continue advancing.
Bjorn, is it possible that they fell back to here and they were here?
That's entirely possible. Entirely possible. Remember what I said at the very beginning?
Right.
There's very little about Bowen in Reed's writing.
Right. But they do draw back after.
Sure, absolutely. Maybe they come back. Yeah. A lot of our story here does involve the Federals. You can't have a war without them. And so, but we continue marching right over the landscape we've covered, fighting constantly, close range, intense rifle combat. Here we reach, we have been trying to turn Hurlbut's line, but just like Stuart, Hurlbut's Yankees won't die. They keep fighting. They won't run and they won't die. And what Hurlbut has done, we already said, he's taken the 32nd Illinois Regiment, moved it from the right of the brigade to the left of the brigade, and we ended up having to deal with them when it looked like we were winning after we'd driven back the 41st Illinois. Now, Hurlbut has taken his right brigade, the whole brigade of Jake and Lauman. They've been fighting in the Hornet's Nest. He's drawn them out of the Hornet's Nest, withdrawn his whole line of battle, made it much shorter, and sent his entire right brigade to his left. And now we finally made it this far, and now we are facing an entire brigade of Yankees, at least as many guys as us, at least as many soldiers as us. And here from this tablet, that tablet, you see the line of battle, another close quarters line of battle, firefight with soldiers going down in piles. Now that tablet there tells the story of how the Bowen has been fighting the 44th Indiana Regiment right in this position. And again, we're pretty much in Martin's regiment. And the 44th Indiana ran out of ammunition and pulled back into the ravine. And fortunately, General Hurlbut had another regiment, a reserve regiment. The 16th Wisconsin Regiment came forward and took a position and replaced the 44th Indiana. So after a bloody firefight, if you want to look at it from Bowen's point of view, after a bloody firefight, we are finally overcoming the Yankees and they're retreating, and a whole other regiment of Yankees marches up and we start over again. Toe to toe, volley to volley, right here at this position. Finally, after much fighting, much more fighting, and Jackson comes up on the right. 12th Illinois is over here. They've been fighting the whole day and they're still fighting now. 57th Illinois is beyond them. They haven't been in the battle yet. They advance up and extend the Union right, and Jackson has to deal with them. Again, from the start of the battle, General Johnston, who's now gone, he's dead now, General Johnston has envisioned a situation where we would attack the Yankees, we would break them with a mighty blow, and then we would send in the reserves and pursue them and destroy them, but these Yankees just won't be destroyed. And every step forward is more blood, more fighting, and the further the sun moves across the sky. We're losing time.
And you
Question.
said the 52nd Illinois that
57.
57? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, you'll find the 57th Illinois Monument right down here, and they lost terribly in that fight against Jackson's brigade. But from our point of view, as Bowen's brigade, we still have Confederates on our right, we still have Confederates on our left, and we are fighting the Yankees that are directly ahead of us. And the only way to go, the only place to go, is forward. Keep pushing forward. Right here.
You said the conflict. How close were they keeping those supply trains up behind those lines?
How close were the Confederate supply trains? This is where that becomes a real problem. they were able to get those cannons through, but the supply wagons is a whole different story. So the Confederate supply wagons are following the roads. And if you're off the roads, if you're in the ravines, it's very difficult to get resupply forward. The Confederates, by now that they've captured a few camps, are starting to resupply by rifling through the Union camps. But of course, that doesn't mean that the ammunition you find will fit the musket you're carrying. And so that is, to say the least, an inefficient solution to a dwindling amount of ammunition.
Did the regiments have their own supply system?
Yeah. The regiments have their own supply system. And this is one of the battles where we learned, where it's demonstrated that that's unsustainable for the Army. Yeah.
So Johnson didn't think about that.
It'll become, yeah, they'll move up to brigade and Army level line, yeah. And then standardized munitions. Over here?
So he hadn't thought about that, Johnson?
Johnson had thought about everything. He just couldn't do it. You know, he had the ammo. I mean, there was ammo back there, stuck in the mud, pushed along the roads, following some other regiment because they couldn't come over here into the ravines. No, Johnson was aware of all this stuff. He knew he was gambling. He, as he would say, probably make a good book title, he was going to roll the iron dice of battle. That's what Johnson said at the beginning.
Is Tim giving you a cut on that?
A typical unit of fire is 40 in a cartridge box, but you could probably fit 20 in your pockets. And if you know you're going into battle like they did, I would imagine these Confederates had 60 rounds. But by now they've probably fired all those rounds. They've fired whatever available resupply they have. They've rifled through the dead and the wounded. They've stolen as much Union ammo as they can get. They're getting close. Yeah. The tablet was not wrong about them running out of ammunition. The primary sources demonstrate that they went much further than that point before they ran out of ammunition.
Now, I mean, they were in the
mule line.
Ravine.
Yeah.
So then they sort of
the road end. We have been going due north on the same axis of advance. Okay. But yeah, I feel the way. If you feel like we're angling across the landscape, I feel that exact. Yeah, from the ravine. No, we've been going due 0 degrees, and we crossed the road because of the road. Yeah. Let's continue on over here. Fighting.
Take a picture of that again.
Understand it, so we need to understand that stuff. All right. I know the day's going by, and we probably don't have a whole lot of time for topics on historiography or historical memory. But you called me, and now you can't undo it. So here we go. Anytime I meet somebody, okay. I am Bjorn Skaptason, a proud Jayhawker from Kansas. I went to school at the University of Kansas. I studied graduate school, history and graduate school at Loyola University Chicago. All of these places are to the north of here on the map. So, but it is so often that I do get to hear someone tell me that history is written by the victors, and the Yankees have been dictating to us what happened for for 150 years, and so on and so forth. And whenever I have one of those conversations, I wish I could be standing right here, like I am with you right now, at the Missouri Monument on the Shiloh National Military Park, where we see all of the Missouri units that fought at the Battle of Shiloh, starting up here, Union units, here, Confederate units, the 1st Missouri Confederate Regiment, alone at the bottom. Yet the state of Missouri chose to place their state monument forever and always on the Shiloh National Military Park at a point that commemorates the service of the one Confederate regiment that Missouri sent to this battle. All of the federal guys are up here, yet there is no monument anywhere where the federal Missouri units fought. Of course, this dates to the 60s, so this is not from the veterans.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Boy Scout project, wasn't it?
Yeah, I heard it's a Boy Scout project. Yeah, and good for the Boy Scouts. Good for the Boy Scouts, and good for that Eagle Scout, because I know what that kind of project involves. So we're just talking about let's continue to be like we are. Come to the battlefield to learn, and come to the battlefield with a broad perspective of what we're looking at. And like I said, when we get to talking about historical memory, which always dovetails with modern contemporary politics, which I am not going to discuss today, but I'm going to see I'm going to remember something like this: the Missouri Monument at Shiloh, with tens of thousands of Union soldiers, is placed in a position to commemorate 800 Missouri Confederate soldiers. Which is the 1st Missouri Confederate Regiment, which at 4 in the afternoon is driving through this area. Now, like I said, they've been fighting more or less since 2. There have been pauses. That's the nature of a Civil War battle. These guys do fight each other to exhaustion, or they have to bring up ammunition, and someone falls back a few feet, and then they come back together and they start fighting. So I'm not going to pretend like it was 2 straight hours of 3 shots a minute, but it is 2 straight hours of infantry combat with very heavy casualties. Now at this point, and again I'm going to tell you I don't understand the tablet back there, at this point we do have reports from the Bowen's commanders that we stopped and redeployed. Actually, the facing of the monument is pretty accurate. Bowen has now started to turn that flank, and he's not going to continue north. He's going to continue to bend that Union flank back. And the Union soldiers, Hurlbut's division, it's going to be 28th Illinois is still here, 41st Illinois is still here, 32nd Illinois is still fighting them, fighting and falling back across the road into the Union camps. And they're going to start to fall back into the Union camps. We can't see it from here, but on the other side of the Union Center, the rightmost Union soldiers of the Union Center are also being pushed back into the camps of Hurlbut's division, and a noose is closing upon what has been the defenders of the Hornet's Nest, although the men in our front are what is left of Hurlbut's division, falling back and fighting. And Bowen and General John Bowen, continues to lead from the front of his brigade, with the Missourians on the right under Lieutenant Colonel Lucius Rich, Martin, and then the Arkansans across the road in Wickerfield. They're going to continue fighting in this direction. So let's head on toward that Union camp.
Now we're going away from the car.
Well, we'll fall back for supply.
It's the point of exhaustion for Bowen's brigade. We've continued advancing with the last of our ammunition, fighting as the Federals fall back into their camp. Remember when we turned the flank of that peach orchard position and we went past the 28th Illinois Monument and the 41st Illinois Monument? That camp tablet, did anybody read it?
Should be the 28th.
28th Illinois Regiment. We have driven them back to their homes, and they're still fighting. At this point, Bowen, and again, that tablet I do not understand, because after passing that tablet, the reports say that they stopped and reoriented. We changed position, right? We're now moving more toward the west. And that is because the Yankees have fallen back into the camp, and we're starting to surround them, and we're pressing them back to their camp. Now at this point, the Tennesseans under Colonel Manny are attacking on our left. The Jackson's brigade is attacking on our right. Chalmers' brigade, having rested and refilled their ammo boxes, are attacking beyond there. And where we're standing now, as I read it, is the last intense fight that Bowen's brigade has on the first day. They've driven the Federals into their camp, and in this position, having an intense firefight, General John Bowen is wounded. I believe he gets knocked on the head, but he might have been shot through an arm or something like that. I didn't look up that. But the commanding officer was wounded. I believe Colonel Lucius Rich, commanding the 1st Missouri, is also killed at this position. He's certainly killed in the battle. And so Bowen's brigade has reached the point of exhaustion, and Bowen's brigade's ammunition once again has reached a final point of exhaustion. It is fortunate, of course, that at the same time they are being squeezed out of the line as Jackson and Chalmers sweep around to the right and Manny pushes down from the left. And so Colonel John Martin takes command after Bowen is wounded, and the brigade is out of ammunition, and they're also out of enemies as they're being squeezed out of the line. And at that point, Colonel Martin orders the brigade to fall back to the road and then try to find some ammunition. So what we're going to do is fall back to the road, and then we'll talk again.
Yeah. You had a question?
A question?
Actually, did the North and the South, either one, have a strong enough organization that when a commander is shot, the obvious
I keep putting Bowen in my head, but I know it's
Right. It would have been, the answer would be not like you would want. But within a brigade, if the brigade has been together long enough, then the brigade commander, in this case Bowen, will have identified, hey, okay, everybody, Martin is next after me, and then Dunlop is next.
But does the brigade carry a deputy, or does he go to one of the...
No, someone bounces up. Yeah, there's no deputy commander. Someone has to quit his job and immediately start the next job.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That could take the system up drastically.
It could, and it often did. Yeah. I see a lot of problems coming from breakdowns from just one guy getting shot.
Who's the outfit replacement for Johnson?
PGT Beauregard. Now, Johnson does have a second in command. It's Beauregard. Okay. So Beauregard takes over. But Beauregard is way far away. And it'll be about 2 hours after Johnson is, maybe an hour after Johnson is killed before Beauregard knows that he's in charge of the army now. And so the time when the Confederate Army is responding to Beauregard after Johnson dies is a considerable gap.
It would take half a day for the word to get out.
Probably would. especially considering the fact that also for morale purposes, they tried to disguise the fact that Johnson was dead. So yeah, that's going to create all sorts of communication and command problems up and down the line. And again, it's because it's an ad hoc army. Yeah. If they'd been together for a year, or if it had been this same army 2 years later, when Joseph Johnson was commanding it during the Atlantic War.
And we'll never know how many of those leaders, starting with company commanders, battalion commanders, regimental, were lost between this morning and now.
Exactly. Yeah. So even this brigade, as efficient as it was, very well trained brigade, albeit without combat experience, was considerably degraded and disorganized between 10 until 2 this morning, but really between the beginning of the intense combat just before 2 and arriving here at about 4. All right. All right, we can now imagine for the first time in 4 stops that we are disengaged from combat. If we're imagining we are Bowen's brigade. We have fought all the way across the landscape, and the brigade is greatly degraded. We've lost our commanding officer, John Bowen. Colonel John Martin is in charge of the brigade. We have fallen back to this road while the rest of the Confederates continue to press the Federal defenders into a tiny little ravine across the way where those who fail to escape will soon be gobbled up. A hollow, could be called Hell's Hollow. But we're not in it. For the first time, it's probably about 4 in the afternoon, 4:30, and for the first time since 2, we are taking a deep breath and not in the battle. But the first thing that Colonel Martin needs is ammunition, because we're out. Not only are we out, the dead are out. We took all of their ammunition. We took all of the ammunition from the wounded. We took all the ammunition from the Yankees that we could use. They're out of ammunition. So Colonel Martin at this point made the decision, you know where I saw some ammunition? A couple of hours ago, we were in a Yankee camp. The camp of the 71st Ohio. Let's go there. So let's go there. What we're going to do now is our program is going to get a little easier for a while, a little easier, because I want to cover a lot of ground in a little bit of time, just like we did this morning. And that means we're going to stay on the paved road, and this paved road goes all the way back to the beginning of the attack, the 71st Ohio camp, and then the Bowen tablet from where we jumped off on our attack. And that's all we're going to do. Stay on the paved road, head straight on back to 71st Ohio. Make sense? Let's go. Anybody getting hungry for lunch? Finish the story of the first day of the battle. So Bowen's brigade was not there for the surrender. They pulled out of the line, out of ammunition, and Colonel John Martin, the new commander of the brigade, pulled them back to a place where he thought they might find some ammunition, and that was the Union camp that they had passed through in their attack, the camp of the 71st Ohio Regiment. They went back there. They did find a resupply. They did get more ammunition, and they did rest. And at that point, the next move for Bowen's brigade was to turn around and go back down the Hamburg-Savannah Road until they got to the point where they were overlooking Grant's last line, Dill Branch Ravine. And General Breckinridge took Bowen and Statham down there. And then at the time Jackson and Chalmers made that last attack, the Dill Branch Ravine attack, Bowen and Statham were down there, and they did not make the last attack. So by show of hands, who wants to turn around and go all the way back?
I want to experience
To learn nothing more than what I just told you. I have nothing more to say other than that when we get there. Yeah, let's not do that. Because after they did not attack, Colonel Martin, it was clear that the battle was over. Colonel Martin wanted to find a camping spot for his guys to fall back to, and he thought to himself, aha, the 71st Ohio camp. and they turned around and they came back up the Hamburg-Savannah Road until they got here. And then by the time the sun went down, Martin and the brigade made their camp in the 71st Ohio camp. And here you have some of the Arkansans wrote, I think Rob in the Willis book is when I saw that, you know, they were still finding, even after they got back, after the Confederates had been in the camp all day, they came back and they found the sutler wagon, and they found cheese, and they found sardines, and they found Yankee rations, and they found tents that were not filled full of holes. So they found a sweet place, a sweet spot to camp out for the night. Martin's Brigade. We're going to start calling it Martin's Brigade now because General Bowen is wounded and he's left the field. Which brings us to the morning of April 7th, 1862. On the morning of April 7th, 1862, the Buell begins his attack. Chalmers especially, we've been hearing about him all day, he and his Mississippi Brigade are all the way down there. And they're some of the first Confederate infantry to encounter Buell and start to fight him. And as they fall back, fighting through Cloudfield, through Wickerfield, through the Bloody Pond area, through the Peach Orchard, all of that, during that time, Martin and his guys have time to get rested, to clean up, to get ammunition, to eat, and then they start getting orders to go from here to there to here to there. Orders from General Joseph Hardee, who was in charge of this part of the Confederate defense. And so Martin, for the greater part of the morning of the 7th, while the fighting is going on out here between Buell and the Confederates, Martin is being sent over here because he might be needed there, and they're being sent over here because they might be needed here. They're down, the brigade is probably down to 12 to 1,500 men by this time in the 4 regiments. They probably had about 2,000 or a little over 2,000 to start the battle. It's in Reed, you can look it up. I just don't have it with me. And so, but for the morning, when all this heavy fighting is going on out here, Martin is moving from place to place. Later in the morning, when we get on to about 9 o'clock or so, Martin starts getting orders from General John Breckinridge, his immediate commander. Now he has orders that override all others. And so at that point, he takes the brigade and he marches due west on Hamburg-Savannah Road, although he might be moving around back there, for all I know. Due west, where he's going to meet his boss, Breckinridge, and with his boss will be Statham's Brigade and Bowen's, Statham's Brigade and Trabou's Orphan Brigade. I always call them that, the Kentucky Brigade. We'll call them the Orphan Brigade after Stones River. In other words, when he gets that order, when Martin gets that order and marches down, that's General Breckinridge blowing the horn, getting everybody back together, where the reserve corps is going to go into battle together as one cohesive unit. So our next stop, now that we're on to the 7th of April, is going straight down the Hamburg-Purdy Road until we get to the intersection of the Eastern Corinth Road. You ready? Let's go. All right, we have arrived at the 3rd and last tablet, that Bowen tablet that we have on the battlefield. And you know what, Rob Girardi? I think the theory you had about the other tablet might be right. Because when you read this, it's also very simple and somewhat obscure. And as we're about to discuss, this brigade arrived here at about 10, attacked, had a big old fight out there, and came back here by 1. And yet the tablet would lead you to believe that they just kind of came here and fought. So I think when they were trying to describe Bowen, they just didn't know. And the best they said was, well, I guess he was here at about this time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I think you might be right about that. But like I said, the story of the second day of the battle is largely told from the Confederates' perspective of the Confederates are pretty disorganized because there's regiment from this brigade over there in that division, and that one is over here, and this general does not command any of the guys that are in his order of battle. And as Dr. Timothy Smith wrote in his Conqueror Parish book, actually the Confederates are much more tightly organized than the 7th than historians have previously given them credit for. And probably the most significant demonstration of that was that by the morning of the 7th, General John Breckinridge, commander of the Reserve Corps, had started getting all 3 of his brigades together. And by getting all 3 of those brigades together, that gave the new Confederate commander, General Beauregard, General D.T. Beauregard, a very strong striking force. Still called the reserve force, but Beauregard has no reserves and never will all day long. But his reserve corps, General Breckinridge's men, some of the best trained men in the Army, some of the best fighting men in the Army, exhausted from a day of fighting, but they are back together as one force, and General Beauregard decides that what we are going to do is we are going to attack. We're going to attack at the center of our line, and we are going to use the most organized, most powerful force that we have, General Breckinridge's Reserve Corps, to do that attack. And by about 10 o'clock in the morning, as I said, Colonel Martin and his guys woke up over in the 71st Ohio camp, and General Hardee ordered them right, left, back, forth, all this area without getting into any fights. And then finally they got the order from Breckinridge, no, come back and join us. We have work. We have work in the center. And so by about 10 o'clock in the morning, Breckinridge had his 3 brigades online, the whole reserve corps minus the losses of the day before. Bowen was on the right. Statham was in the center, and you would have been able to, if you turned around and looked in that direction, you'd be able to see Statham's guys. And then beyond Statham, the Kentuckians back up there, and they pretty much take up the entire frontage of what we call Duncan Field and the Hornet's Nest. And then Breckinridge gives them that order, and this force attacks. And they attack right into the attack of General Buell, who is coming across the landscape from the other direction. With this in mind, I just want to give one short characterization of the overall battle. It does matter to our guys, but it's the overall battle. On the 7th of April, for the overall battle, the story of the 7th of April is the Union Army, Buell and Grant, advances in a counterattack while the Confederate Army attacks in defense. Does that make sense? The Union Army is advancing and driving the Confederates from the camp, but every time a battle happens, it seems like it's the Confederates coming roaring out of the woods into the Yankee attack. Call it a counterpunch, you know? And that is a characteristic of the second day of the battle. The Union Army is moving across the landscape, but the Confederate brigades are thrusting continually into the attack, trying to drive them back and creating an enormous amount of trouble. And as Dr. Smith writes in his book, Conqueror Parish, they very nearly bring Grant and Buell and their combined armies with their superiority in numbers to a stalemate. There's never a chance that the Confederates could have won on the 7th, but boy, did they come close to bringing on a stalemate any number of times. And this is one of those episodes where they come very close to doing that. So at about 10 o'clock in the morning, Bowen's brigade, which we shall call Martin's brigade, because Bowen is already gone, is in line of battle, well rested, resupplied, plenty of ammunition, and they get the order from on top, Breckinridge, let's go, and they launch an attack into the advancing Federals that are heading this direction. And so we will pretty much just take a reading based on the orientation of the tablet, and it's 40 degrees, so we're going northeast.
All the regiments are still the same, still in the same order.
Yeah.
Was that unusual on the 7th?
Yes, it was.
That's what I was thinking. I thought.
Yes, it was.
Well, that's the same outfit, all in the same
Fighting
order.
is one outfit. Everybody in their accustomed position. Yeah, Bowen's Brigade's good. Bowen's Brigade is a good batch of well-trained fighting men. And even now, after terrible casualties on the 1st, losing their commander, they're in line of battle in the same organization. Yeah. Good observation, Shane. Let's go.
I don't think you did. Fuel.
Well, yeah, Jewel, but doing for hazing. I'm thinking
The Hornet's Nest, which was still the Hornet's Nest on April 7th, even after April 6th. So this is an attack through the Hornet's Nest by Bowen's Brigade. Statham is still over here. Statham is going to come in contact with elements of Crittenden's division that are attacking in this direction. So the two attacking columns are meeting each other in the middle. Bowen is going to shoot into a gap because Crittenden has not come up yet. So Bowen is shooting into a gap, and a few hundred yards ahead, General Nelson's Union division, facing this direction, is trying to attack that direction, while Bowen, facing this direction, is attacking that direction. Neither one of these generals planned it that way. Bowen being Martin. And so what we're doing now is continuing Bowen's attack with lunch at our orientation point. And in the middle of this mess, these two units are going to come together and make an even bigger mess. Okay? So let's continue Martin's attack.
Did you lose your phone, Mama?
Only because I am out of breath and starting to get a little tired. Okay, we just said that they're going to be attacking into the flank of General Nelson's division, and that General Crittenden's division was holding back, and that was unfair to part of General Crittenden's division. General Nelson is attacking in that direction, and on the right flank of General Nelson's division is the leading brigade of General Thomas Crittenden's division. Earlier this morning, Confederate General George Crittenden was fired for drunkenness. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. Here comes Union General Thomas Crittenden leading a division, and the answer is yes, they are brothers. They're brothers, and they're both from Kentucky. And so George and Tom would have been fighting each other if George had not been fired and replaced by General Breckinridge. But still, there's a Union brigade coming through this direction, facing that direction. It's an Ohio brigade commanded by Colonel William Suey Smith. Attached to it is a large, newly recruited Wisconsin regiment called the 14th Wisconsin Regiment, and they are attacking astride the road. And Bowen's brigade took them in flank. They were attacking cannons in Confederate cannons, the Washington artillery, over here in what's called the Daniel Davis Wheat Field. While they made that attack, they were attacked by Breckinridge's attack on their flank. And so Bowen took them in flank, and that broke the 14th Wisconsin, the rear. It also of Suey Smith's brigade, they retreated to the rear. And fortunately for Suey Smith himself, having a strange regiment attached to his brigade gave him a scapegoat to blame for his own failure to guard his flank while he was attacking. He blamed the 14th Wisconsin, whereas the whole brigade was thrown back by the attack in their flank. Now this was a very bloody and confusing battle, obviously. Here come the Confederates from here, we're going that way, here come the Confederates, we're fighting, we're shooting, trying not to kill our own guys. The Confederates sweep us off, and Suey Smith and his guys retreat back where they came. At that moment, General Nelson's division is also attacking toward those cannons. Okay? General Nelson's division is also attacking toward those cannons, and as Martin and his guys plow through Suey Smith and pursue them, they are taken in flank by General Nelson's division, who is going this direction, right? Suey Smith attacked, smacked by Bowen, going this way. Bowen's winning. Martin is winning. Attacking that way, smack! They're attacked by Nelson in the flank, and now they are driven back. There's going to be, there's a very vivid description of this combat left by a Union sergeant named Ambrose Bierce. And if anybody wants to hang around for the afternoon, we're going to talk about it again. But this is what we're talking about. And then finally what happened after Martin retreats is that Nelson went ahead and he attacked those cannons, captured them briefly in a hand-to-hand fight. Confederates counterattacked and drove Nelson all the way back. And after all of this, both armies were back where they started. Reorganizing. Bloody and torn to pieces, and neither side has accomplished anything.
What time of day is this?
This would be about 10:30, between 10 and 11. Okay? If Martin had succeeded in blowing through Nelson's division, they would have been rewarded with lunch. So let us continue in the direction we've been going, and there should be sandwiches there for us. And we'll wrap up our program when we get to the peach orchard. Sound good? All right. Let's go. In the 53rd Ohio, an officer writes down the time the first cannonball came over, 7:10. So that's one of the times when we can put a pin in the time. But no, generally once the battle got going, those guys stopped. If whoever was keeping track of that stuff, they stopped doing it, keeping a record. We're in the sunken road. At the end of the road is...
You thought at the end of the road there's a rainbow.
you guys don't even want to see. Okay, we have reached the end of our program on Bowen's brigade at the Battle of Shiloh, the brigade of General John Stevens Bowen. But of course now in those, we know from the second half of the program, it is also the history of Colonel John Martin's brigade in the fight on the second day of the battle. General John Bowen was wounded in the afternoon of April 6th. So what does this tell us? Well, the first thing that we have is that the fighting, the tactical situation, resulted in temporarily in a stalemate, which ought to surprise anybody that looks at the Battle of Shiloh and thinks that the second day, April 7th, was a foregone conclusion just because General Buell had arrived. Those of us that came around on the second day's march just had an example of how the Confederate counterpunching into the Union advance very nearly created a stalemate. Not a victory, no chance for a victory, but very nearly created a stalemate with the Union forces. And a major part of that was the counterattack made by General John Breckinridge's Confederate Reserve Corps, a third of which was Martin's / Bowen's brigade, attacking on the right. But ultimately they were driven back. The Union forces rallied, continued to push forward, and the Confederates were driven off the field, and the Battle of Shiloh resulted in a victory for the Union armies and a retreat to Corinth by Beauregard's army, because Johnston is dead, and Martin's brigade, because Bowen is wounded. Once they arrived in Corinth, what happened next for the rest of the brigade is actually pretty short, but for the men involved, it's much longer. Within a month of the Battle of Shiloh, the Confederate government passed a law, which was a conscription law, that conscripted, the first major conscription law in all of American military history, and suddenly all Southern men from a certain young age, 17 to maybe 45, were just in. Everybody's conscripted, and a major part of that conscription law was everybody currently in the Confederate Army, almost all of whom had agreed to 1 year of service, would be drafted for the duration. So on the eve of their discharge, all these Confederates were drafted for the duration. Part of a compromise solution for the problems created there was that the Confederate armies reorganized, and all of the regiments that had performed up to this time held new elections and elected new officers and were reorganized and started a new program. Okay? So the Confederate Army pretty much just turns over. They pretty much just turn over. One of the things that happens is one of these Confederate brigades, the 2nd Confederate, goes out of business. The Confederates don't want any brigades made up of Mississippians, Tennesseans, and Arkansans all in the same pot together. So those guys just go out of business. They're gone forever. The men go into other regiments. The Arkansans from the Confederate regiment go into the 9th Arkansas Regiment. So they continue in the same brigade. The 9th and 10th Arkansas regiments reorganize. They elect new commanders, and then they go on. Same thing with the 1st Missouri Confederate. General Bowen recovered from his wound and commanded a division at the Battle of Corinth. I'm going to be wrong about that. I think he commanded a division at the Battle of Corinth. In that battle, Colonel John Martin was killed. So John Martin, who commands this brigade through half of our program, fell at the Battle of Corinth. This brigade, the men that were left in it, continued to consolidate. A lot of them worked together. 9th and 10th Arkansas never separated throughout the entire war. They continued to work together. The 1st Missouri went into the all-Missouri 1st Missouri Confederate Brigade. In the Vicksburg campaign, these troops come together in one division, commanded by General Bowen, now recovered. during the winter of 1862 and 1863, that division, 2 brigades, largely the guys we saw today, plus the 1st Missouri Confederate Brigade, which includes the 1st Regiment, trained intensely under their highly skilled, highly experienced officers, including General Bowen, class of 1853 from the U.S. Military Academy. They began to learn to get their orders from music. And General Bowen got his division to the point where the officers didn't need to raise their voices at all. An entire division of 5,000 men could march across this landscape, change formation, go left, go right, send out skirmishers, be in a column of march, wheel to the left, wheel to the right, all in perfect time, all to the music of the bugle. And by the time the Vicksburg campaign opened, by the time General Grant crossed the river, Bowen's division was, by the judgment of Edwin Cole Barth, the former historian of the National Park Service and Vicksburg author, Bowen's division was the finest division in either army. And at battles like Port Gibson and Champion Hill, that Confederate division, largely outnumbered by their enemies, fought valiantly and effectively again and again and again, delaying or changing Grant's plans. Of course, they were driven into Vicksburg with the rest of Pemberton's army, and they surrendered on the 4th of July, 1863. And a few days after the surrender of Pemberton's army and Bowen's division, General John Stevens Bowen fell sick very quickly, very aggressively, fell down with a disease, and by I think the 8th or 10th of July, he died. General Bowen died immediately after the surrender of Vicksburg. So by the time Vicksburg falls, Bowen is dead, Martin is dead. The division that they trained to be the best division in the entire army, in either of the armies, had been savaged in the fighting for Vicksburg, largely because time and again General Pemberton had put them in because they were the only reliable reserve that Pemberton had. Thus, the effectiveness, the importance of a reserve on an army. But that is the future. And that brings us to the end of our program on Bowen's Brigade in the Battle of Shiloh. We have learned the history of Sidney Johnston and his death from the point of view of the soldiers who were near him. We have followed Bowen across the landscape until he was shot. We followed Martin after that. We've met the men of the 1st Missouri Confederate Regiment from St. Louis and Camp Jackson. We've met the Confederates from Mississippi, Tennessee, and Arkansas under John Martin. We've met the 9th and 10th Arkansas regiments. Men of Arkansas, you are famous for your skills with the knife, but today you wield a nobler weapon, the bayonet. And so that does bring us to the end of our program on Bowen's Brigade at Shiloh. Thank you for joining me this morning, and if anybody has any questions, I am happy to entertain any questions you have. Rob says he'd like me to repeat it. Welcome to the Battle of...
Stay tuned for the next video.